Good afternoon. Welcome to the Board of Behavioral Sciences Exempt Setting Committee meeting. This is the subcommittee of the board in which we are discussing issues surrounding exempt settings for mental health service delivery in the state. My name is Patricia Locke-Dawson, and I'm the committee chairperson. And I'm going to call the meeting to order at 1:37. I have on my watch here, and we are at the Department of Consumer Affairs hearing room on 1747 North Market Boulevard in Sacramento, California. I would like to start with introductions, and we'll start with Christy.
Christy Berger, Regulatory Analyst for the Board.
Spencer Walker, Attorney for the Board.
Kim Manson, Executive Officer for the Board.
Betty Connolly, LEP Member for Board.
Christina Wong, LCSW Member.
Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer of the Board.
Do we have a quorum?
I'll establish a quorum now.
Okay.
So I'll take roll. Patricia Locke-Dawson.
Here.
Betty Conley.
Here.
Christina Wong.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Keymer. All right, and we can have members of the audience introduce themselves if they'd be willing. We can start up in the front row here if you'd just like to tell us your name and where you're from, just in 2 seconds. Welcome. Behind you, let's go to Jan Lee.
Okay, Jerry Grossman Seminars.
Jan Lee Wong, NASW.
Becca Gonzalez, NASW.
David Clark with the Couples Resource Collective.
Billy Schultz, Couples Resource Collective.
Dave Jensen, Camp Staff Attorney.
Jerry Shapiro, School of Social Work, San Francisco State.
Christine Whitlisbach, BBS Board Member.
Dan Strike, assisting with the Board and Bureaus.
Thank you. All right, welcome everybody. So I can review the purpose of the committee again, just for those who are attending for the first time. I don't think we have it in there, but the purpose is to look at exempt settings throughout the state and determine whether we are adequately protecting the public with the laws and regulations and policies we have in place now for exempt settings. And we're reviewing those to determine if there are any actions we need to take to adequately ensure consumer protection, or if those rules that we have in place right now stand and are adequate for consumer protection. Then we will keep them in place. We are a committee of 3, and we anticipate this is an ad hoc committee, and we anticipate that it'll last probably 18, 20 months, and our work will be done, and we will make recommendations to the board at that time. Does anybody have any questions about the purpose? Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to our agenda item. First one is our in our last committee meeting, we had a discussion regarding surveying the people that are most impacted by any changes to rules on the exempt setting. And that includes licensees, folks trying to get their licenses, and of course consumers. And rather than us trying to figure out what are the issues, we decided that we thought it would be prudent to survey those folks who are affected. So we had staff develop a couple different surveys, and I'll let you take it from there, Christy. And we had one survey that was distributed at our last board meeting in March, and we gave comments back to staff, and they brought us back a revised version of that. So I'm going to let Christy speak to that.
Thank you. This is the first of 2 surveys. This one is specifically directed toward helping us determine or look at the types of placements where students are working. So we're going to be looking at students. Initially, we're looking at LMFT and LPCC students because the board has some regulatory authority, minimal, but some over those students. We decided at the last meeting to add LCSW students, even though we have less input on what they do, but the committee felt it would be good to take a look and include them as well. So basically, it's what we're looking at surveying is the placement coordinators, people who are actually working in the schools system. And the reason we're doing this, a lot of these students are working in exempt settings. And we have gotten a lot of questions from schools about the various challenges and uncertainties they encounter when determining where to place students and approving settings for their students, because they have the primary responsibility of working with those sites. They have to contract with them, and they have a lot of monitoring duties. And our law does put forward some specific parameters, but it's not abundantly clear in a lot of cases whether a particular setting is appropriate. And a lot of that has to do with ownership or for-profit status, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. It's clear that a nonprofit is acceptable, but a for-profit, maybe not. It's a difficult, when you read the law, it's not completely clear. And then whether the setting provides the types of services that are appropriate for student training. So the survey is designed to help answer those kind of questions. Just a little bit of background. LMFT and LPCC students are called trainees once they've hit 12 semester units or 18 quarter units of coursework in that degree program. LCSW law calls them social work interns. I've listed what the current law talks about in terms of acceptable settings for students, and this we're talking about practicum. They have to lawfully and regularly provide mental health counseling or psychotherapy. The setting has to provide oversight to ensure that the trainees' work at the setting meets the experience and supervision requirements and is within the scope of practice, and it cannot be a private practice. LCSW law is less specific about the settings for student interns, but it is clear that our law says that employment in a private practice is prohibited until an individual is registered as an ASW. So that they cannot work in a private practice until registered. We don't approve, there's no process. Students don't register with us. We do get questions about work settings. And again, we have little jurisdiction, but there are some additional requirements when in the law for LMFT and LPCC that talks about how the school works with the setting. So the school is required to coordinate between the school and the site, and the school has to actually approve each site and have a written agreement detailing each party's responsibilities, including the methods of supervision. And the written agreement must provide for regular progress reports and evaluations of the student performance. LMFT trainees can count hours of pre-degree experience toward licensure, so they have other requirements that have to be met if they wish to count those hours. So, and social work interns don't have any of these requirements. So what I want to turn your attention to now is the draft survey. It's shown the changes. In my copy, it's in red, but generally it's in a different color and underlined what's been added since the last time. So a lot of what you're seeing is just adding LCSW to the survey. And LCSW calls it field study rather than practicum, so I added that term in here as well. Let's see. The committee asked for a couple of questions to be added. So question number 4 now asks, does the school require a supervisor who's a licensed mental health professional to oversee the experience? So the options are no, or yes, and that they require an on-site supervisor, or yes, the supervisor can be off-site. The other question the committee added was number 7. Are there any settings not currently allowed by law that you or your school feels may be suitable placement settings for students? And if they answer yes, we'd like information on the types of settings and why, to give us a little bit broader information. And then question 12, we decided to ask that question for all types of students, whether they continue on at their site after graduation. We had originally put in MFT thinking, well, they can count those hours as a trainee. They're most likely to be the ones that would continue there, but we were told that that is actually fairly common for people in other professions as well. So that's that.
All right, thank you, Christy. Do we have any questions from the board regarding the survey?
I had a question, but I'm not sure if this is the time to ask it.
Try
Maybe
it.
it's a clarification question, honestly, and it may address the rest of these issues. It's my understanding that really our goal was to find out about exempt settings and what's going on in exempt settings.
The next survey. There's another.
Okay, I think that's where I got confused,
Okay.
because it seemed to me that we were going off on a different tangent with looking at where clinical services provided in general. So are we talking about surveying all of our licensees and registrants?
Are you looking at what I handed out?
Yeah.
That goes with the next agenda item.
Okay.
Item number 5. Yeah, we're on number 4 right now.
Okay, so what I'm looking at here, that's the next thing?
That's the next item.
That's the next one. Okay, then it wasn't the right time.
Sorry. It's okay. That's all right.
No, actually, I think it was a good question, because it does clarify that we are looking at 2 different surveys. I had that same issue last meeting.
Yeah.
I remember I was confused by the 2 surveys, so thank you, Betty. Christine?
So I've just a couple of the questions. So the number 4, the one that we added on.
Mm-hmm.
So the term to oversee the experience. So I am trying to think, that sometimes, at the school, they have a task supervisor, and then they have the other supervisor who actually provide the actual supervision. So overseas may seem kind of, coming, not quite clear, which category that we're trying to address.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking about, will that be more, we try to refer to supervise
Rather than oversee?
than overseas. It's really providing that, that supervision.
Sure.
So whatever the term that we want to, maybe to supervise the experience instead of oversee.
So if you want me to change, what we want to do, so our goal is to be able to release this survey after
Right.
this meeting. So if the committee agrees on wording changes, we need to do that now so that when you approve it, it's ready to go. So just, yeah.
I was just going to make that recommendation, that if we do that, and I don't have a problem with it, but I think we need, the expediency's sake, we need to get the survey out. So I don't want to tinker too much with the wording, because I think it looks pretty good from the last time, but I think that's a good change if Betty agrees, and if our public folks agree out there too, that are here in attendance.
Christina, you think the word supervise is
It's clear.
Very clear.
It's clear. Okay, I'm good with that too.
And then the other question I have is number 11. So we ask about how many agencies do the students have to choose from to earn practicum hours. I cannot recall the rationale why we're asking that question.
Why are we asking about practicum?
Right. Asking how many agencies that they have to choose from. That's number 11.
Okay, it's because there's so much confusion. Oh wait, number 11?
Number 11.
Oh, I'm trying to remember where that question came from. How many agencies do they have to choose from?
I thought it was motivated by that if we did do something with exempt committees, we wouldn't be taking away opportunities, so we wanted to identify whether they had a wealth of opportunities to choose from. Is that your thinking? Do you remember that?
I'm trying to remember.
That's my recollection.
Yeah, so I think it was trying to get an idea of just what the universe was for opportunities for them to earn hours. That was my.
I'm just thinking about, if we're asking about their supervision experience, it's just kind of a little bit, on the side. So I'm just thinking about, if we can, if it's really, how we're going to use that information. It's one question, but, if we make it more condensed and more precise, then that would be.
I'm wondering if are we looking to find out, is it hard for students to find placements? Maybe that's where we're going with that, and maybe that's more of a question.
That's what I recall.
That's what I was talking about, the universe of opportunities.
Right. Yes.
So
okay.
Would we?
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah. So
I'd like to keep it in, actually, just because, if you don't mind, Christina,
No,
I think it's a good question to keep in there. I would like to know. I would like to know how.
What if we use the word sites rather than agencies?
Yeah, I think that would be.
Then that's inclusive?
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe it's something other than an agency, maybe.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just more thinking about, what do we want the information for? Yeah.
I think it would be nice to see what they have to choose from, if it really is limited or not. All right, do we have any questions or comments from anybody in the audience? And can you please come forward? And I think we've got a,
Oh, they can stop there.
at the podium. And just please state your name for the record.
Jerry Shapiro, San Francisco State. Thanks, Christy, for putting the survey together. And I apologize, I'm aware there's a timeline, people want to get this out. My concern is, and I hope there may be some possibility of having some clarification on page 1, just below the LMFT and LPCC laws require the following. Have some comparable area of specification and clarification for LCSWs. Because again, speaking as someone who teaches in a school of social work, and I actually am involved in placing students and visiting agencies just so the pieces fit together. The standard of care is a little bit different for LCSWs in terms of the focus being provision of psychosocial services, with a paragraph below that in the BBS and Business and Profession Code of Law that specifically identify and characterize psychotherapy as related to that characterization of clinical social work. And that necessarily doesn't limit the focus to mental health. So a lot of my students go through the MSW program working towards qualifying for LCSW supervision after they graduate. And I'm concerned there may be some confusion here, people responding to the survey, confusion about, well, is this the MSW internship, the 2-year, there's a first-year field placement, there's a second-year field placement. Then the student graduates, and if the student chooses to pursue an LCSW license, they find an agency setting, or perhaps they're employed in an agency setting that provides supervision, usually by an LCSW, that addresses the criteria and standards presented by the board. So it's a little bit different journey than the LMFTs and the LPCCs. And I'm just wondering if maybe putting a little bit of clarifying language, and I'd be happy to try to draft something that would let people know that the information that you want to get for the LCSWs are MSWs who are intending after graduation to move towards LCSW. You look puzzled.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where we would put that. And if you have language that we can, is that on the first page of the survey?
Yeah, I'm thinking just a couple simple lines, something along the lines that students working towards completion of their MSW may envision progressing to working for an LCSW in anticipation of those supervision hours, and then maybe some clarity as to the information that you're gathering. If you want, I can draft something and then come back in a couple of minutes and not take the committee's time right now. But does it make sense what my concern is?
That's what I was just going to turn to the board and ask, the committee members feel that that would add clarity and give us additional information? Is it necessary? I guess I would ask. Is it the pleasure of the committee to have that?
So I think, Dr. Superior really have a point. Year of the social work program is more, the general practice, so they can be placed, pretty much, anywhere, and not necessarily mental health. So it's a little bit broader, the choices of the placement that may not be relevant to the, to the survey. I think you have a better chance to limit just for the concentration year, for the second year of the program, and that would be more relevant, to just pinpointing the mental health and also even possibly the child welfare. A lot of the social workers employed afterwards, in those kind of agencies that are interested in the license. So I think, it gives the introduction a little bit clearer, who would be answering those questions, and, Yeah.
Okay, Kim?
So, I don't know if this will satisfy you, but let me throw this out there, Dr. Shapiro. In that first sentence where it talks about what we're asking for placement coordinators to provide that information, and if you look at the line regarding work settings for students in practicum or field study, adding some language that clarifies that they're seeking licensure down the road, something along that line, who intend to pursue licensure. And then that way, we're not going to capture those folks who may want their MSW and then go on to do policy work.
Yeah, that definitely gets at it.
Okay. So I think we can wordsmith that if the committee is agreeable.
Okay.
And then following up on that, Kim, on page 2, would you want to clarify that some way in terms of setting type A or setting type B? Because for a second-year MSW student, for example, they may be placed in child protective services. They may be placed in a medical setting. And what's happening more and more in the field is that mental health is evolving into integrated behavioral health.
So would that not be covered under other? If somebody were to put that in, just check that and say.
Well, I guess I'm asking to weigh the advantages and disadvantages of being specific in terms of child protective service, adult protective services, or leaving it as it is in terms of governmental agencies. And I think that's something maybe going back to Christie's experience of, would you get more valuable information by being specific? Or do we just want a more general sweep?
I think at this point we want a little bit more of a general sweep. That's just off the top of my head.
I'm kind of with you in that, just because going back to that other question that Christina Wong brought up is I think this is an opportunity for us to gather information as well. So, and not to have it too specific. I would like to open it to everybody and let's see what we get back from it. It's not a scientific survey, so it's not, we're not doing anything statistically, to do any statistics to meet any kind of test. So I think it would be nice to just have another category and see what comes back, see what they're giving us. I don't know.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. I'm just following up on Christina's question about number 11, and I just wanted to point out that if you have a really big school like USC, and which has a huge program in LA and also an online program, and how many agencies do you have placements, and then you compare that to a small school like San Francisco State is relatively small. So I don't know what the numbers tell you without, with the differences in the populations.
I had that. I kind of was rolling that through my head a little bit. Maybe there's a better way to formulate the question. Are there an adequate number of sites available for your students, or something along the lines of, getting more at the question as opposed to a number which may not tell us the whole
Yeah, the
story.
number's not going to tell you anything.
So if it's about finding if there are adequate, I don't know how to.
Maybe
have to think about the wording.
Maybe like a sub question after that. Is this number adequate to serve your students?
Yeah, that might be.
Just a clarifier.
Or just even, do you have trouble?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have difficulty finding sites for your students to earn their practicum hours?
Okay.
I mean, that
and
kind
then
of gets
that's a
at
yes
the,
or no.
Yeah, and that gets
Yeah, I think that. Is that a better question then?
I think so.
No, I have a question, but let Jan.
Okay.
Go
Jan
first.
Lee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
Jan Lee
welcome.
Wong, NASW. It's not a criticism, but when you just simply drop LCSW in front of everything, it doesn't quite work. I'll give you several examples and hopefully some suggestions. Okay. So in the introductory part, before question number 1, it says if you are a practicum placement coordinator or other educator directly involved in a LCSW, et cetera, practicum or fieldwork program, please answer the following questions. Well, it may sound technical, but most schools of social work don't categorize their focus or concentration as LCSW. They either call it mental health or behavioral health. It sounds like a minor thing, but when you're trying to, as you well know, devise a survey, it's really important to get the question right, so it's not ambiguous and it's clear. So I'm not aware of any school that has a LCSW practicum or an LCSW field work.
Would it be MSW then? Change it to MSW?
Well, I think what you're trying to get at is which ones are, do you have like a mental health focus to your program, to your social work program, or concentration? Do you have a behavioral health? I think that's what you're trying to get at. So
it would be, you would suggest involved in a MSW program with a focus?
Well, I would just change that first box to mental health or behavioral health. It's kind of obvious if you're in an LMFT program, you're going to be in a mental health kind of practicum. I think it's pretty clear. At least that's what you want. But it's less clear for social work because not every MSW goes for a license.
So would you recommend striking the LMFT and LPCC as well, or would you just leave it at that?
Well, MFTs tend to be more.
Well, I'm just asking for the statement. Would you have it be mental health professional, comma, or whatever, the mental health behavioral health program, comma, LMFT or LPCC practicum or fieldwork?
I'd leave it the way it is for the MFTs.
And then, but change LCSW with the wording that you just suggested.
Use mental health or behavioral health.
My concern there is we're trying to find out for our population and so that we can tease this out by our different student populations of the licenses that we oversee. So if I was answering the survey and I was in an MFT program, I might mark both boxes. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that without mentioning MSW that people are going to differentiate between them.
That's what I'm concerned, because those other license classes that have.
They're also behavioral health, mental health, behavioral
That's my
health.
concern. That's why I was asking if you wanted
So you could
rid
add MSW.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Okay, then on question 1, let's see, or question 11. The way field assignments work in schools of social work is the school tells the student where their field placement is. So this idea of choosing, like I have a list of 100 or 50 or 25, that it doesn't work that way. It's more that the school looks at, the student can say, I have preferences, here are my first 3 preferences or something, but eventually the school decides which field placement they will have. Isn't that right, Jerry?
No, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
And Jan Lee graduated from San Francisco State. Schools vary tremendously. At San Francisco State, we have 5 agencies for every student. We let students pick.
Oh, okay.
But Berkeley,
Sacramento.
yeah, they're more inclined to say, okay, we'll interview you. Here's 3 choices. Pick one of these. If one of these 3 doesn't work, then come back and we'll see what we can do. It really varies from school to school. Social work, this is very closely monitored by the Council on Social Work Education that accredits every program. And the big push in accreditation right now is to actually designate field as the signature pedagogy of social work practice. So there's a real emphasis now on generating creative placements, trying to come up with placements that are on the wave of what's innovation. Palliative care, for example, health care for transgender population. So it varies from school to school.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Can you come in and speak in the mic? We're having issues hearing you on the.
Yeah, we're trying to.
We're webcasting that, so we need to make sure we're getting everybody.
Yeah, no, I think Jan Lee's been great in characterizing how important it would be to have MSW. In terms of the field, there's tremendous flexibility. What I would suggest in terms of the previous question is how would you characterize the availability of field placements in relation to the number of students you have? and then give them 3 choices at Characterize, and that allows them to localize it to their particular community, but still gives you a sense, is there scarcity or does it hit the designated number? And that would be a way, I think, for you to get a better picture of the fit. Did you want to add anything else?
We kind of have 2 different things going on here, I think. We've got, yeah, I know, I am on question 11, but so we did have a recommendation we had several recommendations. One was agencies to sites, then it was, well, is it adequate? So do you have enough? That was a yes or no, and now we're saying we're going back to characterizing it. So what do we want to do here? Do we want to have it a yes or no, or do we want to get an idea of whether it's adequate?
I like Jerry's suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I get a little more specifics on how that might be worded? Because I'm not clear.
I think Jerry can write it up for you.
Okay.
If you write it up and then you can, and then I'll, yeah, that would be terrific. Thank you. Okay, Jan Lee, please.
And my last comment on number 13 is, I'm a little unclear what that question is asking. What type of information or clarification would be helpful from the BBS in terms of student placements? Because as you stated earlier at the beginning, MSW education is really not regulated by the board because the hours don't count. The hours don't count for licensure. So this 13 could be interpreted many ways. You know, it's like, gee, the board wants law and ethics. So, you know, we do law and ethics in our curriculum. Or, I mean, somebody might even think the board wants psychotherapies, and then the response would be, we don't do specifically psychotherapy, you know, as far as some of our curriculum is concerned. It's just a little, I wouldn't know how to answer question 13, so I don't know if, Jerry, you have some thought. Is it a clear question, just leave it the way it is, question 13?
Is there harm in leaving it in? Is there potential harm in it?
Well, the problem is the person filling it out might be stumped, you know, and then might put any answer, and then it'd be up to the person reviewing the answers to decide what was the, you know, what did the answer mean, or what was the majority answer, or something like that.
I think the question would be pretty clear for our LMFT and OCC.
It would be. It would be.
I can see where for a social work person answering this that they might wonder, well, BBS has really nothing to do with this. So,
exactly. What do you want me to say, you know?
I suppose we just put LMFT and LPPC only.
You could do that. That would be a simple way to
just put it in. And then you could also have a box that said, or other comments, just open-ended for anybody that wants to say anything, I suppose. Do we have that in there? Somewhere we don't, right?
We'll add number 14 that says...
Just any other comments you might want to give us, I think.
Just Jerry Shapiro. Just a thought in response to Janley's question for 13. What type of questions and issues have you encountered in applying BBS guidelines in the selection of student placements? And that way, I think you might get valuable information in terms of what kind of difficulties or challenges.
Jerry, can you say once more, if you don't mind? Repeat the language.
For 13, what types of issues and challenges have you encountered in applying BBS standards in the selection of student placements?
That's much clearer.
I'm working on the other one.
Okay, thanks. All right, anybody else have any comments or questions?
Jeffrey Liebert, AMFT California. Thank you for the conversation. I know seems like this is as finalized as you guys were hoping it could be, and there's a lot of comments about adjusting things. My comment, the first comment that I have is about number 10. I would imagine it's a relatively simple change, but the way it's worded now with a yes, no, and a we don't require but we encourage makes the no seem like we don't require and we don't encourage. So my suggestion is maybe just have a yes and a no. And then
Or I suppose you could have a third one that just says it's encouraged. Or we encourage it. So it's sort of like yes, no, but, or definite yes, definite no, or we encourage it.
Right. And like I said, I would imagine it's a relatively small change for that one. The other suggestion that I have is to add a question, maybe having an indication of the percentage of students that are paid during their placements. So kind of like an open-ended box of percentage unpaid, percentage paid by stipend, and percentage paid as employee. And it would be a rough estimate, or as accurate as possible, obviously.
We had something in there. There might be a good spot to put that, if I remember correctly. There was something. I thought there was something, a good spot for it. Maybe under 2, the types of settings. Maybe it would fit in as a either. Maybe it would be the new 3. Just. I don't know if the board feels okay with that, or is that belaboring the point? Christy, would that be helpful for you? What would we do with that information, I guess I'm asking. Is that helpful to know? And I would ask other board members to, I mean, in the purview of this committee, is that helpful information?
Yeah. Yes.
It is?
It definitely
okay.
is.
So, and do you want to state what it is again, and we can put it in there? I think we can. If Betty, do you feel it as well, that you would like to see that in there?
I don't think I'm quite clear on what a paid position would look like, frankly.
In a student?
For a student.
Whether a school?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
So it's basically at these agencies who is being paid by stipend, and who is being paid as an employee. And I would imagine that the number of people that are paid is relatively low, but it might be interesting to at least start gathering some of that data. And
are you trying to find out the proportion of free workers versus paid workers, or are you talking about the actual what students are getting? I think I'm a little confused as Betty is on that.
Yeah, that's one aspect of it, to determine kind of who is getting paid and where they're getting paid, maybe which settings are encouraging those type of things. It also somewhat goes to the conversation we were having earlier in the supervision committee about certain requirements and availability of jobs and things like that. So it does kind of double dip in that committee as well.
So Jeff, I'm wondering if you're thinking about, asking a question like whether it's a paid internship by the agency.
Yes.
It's a way more straightforward, because I have this issue too, that I interview students and they got stolen by an agency who paid. Of course they would go for that agency who, go for the paid internship. So I think that might simplify, clarify and simplify the question.
So what would the question be?
Is this a paid agent? Is it a paid internship by the agency? Yes or no?
Or even percentage of agencies that offer paid internships. Right, so you'd have your number right above would be, we have 20 agencies that we contract with, and 10% offer payment.
Well, are you talking about the person who I'm sorry, Kim, go ahead.
Yeah. Just for my clarification, so I'm a student, I'm in my practicum program, I'm getting ready to be placed. I'm going to go work, or not work, but that's part of my education. They get paid during that period?
They can.
They can?
They can.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's where I was.
Wow.
I can tell
because
you.
I after school, yes, there's paid, not paid, volunteer. So then my next question is, how do you decide what student gets that position? I mean, you've got a class of 20 students in practicum, and there's 2 paid positions. So you send all 20 and let the students compete? Yeah, I'm looking at you, Dr. Shapiro, because you have a school.
Well, I'll complicate it further.
Can you please come forward to the mic, Dr. Shapiro?
Wow, okay.
Thank you.
I learn something new every day. I love it.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, there aren't quite a few placements with substantial financial support. No, let me make it worse. There are a number of placements, $18,500 a year, that go untaken because the students are concerned about the commitment they have to make after they graduate. And I'm just speaking now for social work, and I'll just speak.
At the agency.
And in Northern California right now, there are many, many more social work jobs than there are students. So even in graduate school, students are thinking strategically, yes, the money looks really good now. Do I want to take this and have a one-year commitment for what used to be mental health, but this year switching to integrated behavioral health, or child protective services, or adult protective services? So a number of students this year, I'll just speak to what used to be the mental health stipend. I had 8 stipends, only 4 students decided to apply. So I have to give 4 $18,500 stipends with only a one-year commitment, but basically with a guaranteed job after you graduate, with the opportunity for supervision for their license. Only 4 applicants.
So that's the mental health stipend that, that Dr.
Which is changing this year to integrated behavioral health, just for the technical language. So yeah, no, and Kaiser has money available.
Okay, so what I want to do though is I want to come back to the purpose of our committee, and I want to know if that is relevant information to our what we're supposed to be doing here is our purpose. So, Roseanne.
I think it is, and I think I would even take it a step farther based on Ben's conversation at the last board meeting when he was talking about that we've noticed that some trainee settings have started to charge trainees.
Right.
I would even take it a step farther and include that piece as one of the options.
Yeah, right.
That way we can start, since we're already running the survey, we can start gathering that data. I think it's very relevant to how people are getting paid or if they're paying to this committee.
Okay. So does the board want to make a recommendation, to the committee want to make a recommendation to include an additional question regarding that? And if so, can we determine wording today so we can get this car off the lot? Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not sure if there's somebody who wants to come up with that. Does somebody want to submit it, write it up?
Something that I can help to write, absolutely.
Okay, and then bring it up with Dr. Shapiro's language, and then we'll decide if that's something we want to recommend.
If you don't mind, can we clarify the options of what, because it sounds like we may have just added another one.
Right.
I appreciate the suggestion, Roseanne. So the ones that I suggested were unpaid, paid by stipend, and paid as an employee. And it sounds like maybe now ones where you have to pay yourself to work there. And I'm wondering, is that a comprehensive list? Remove any, add any?
That's a good question for Ben.
No, fair enough.
Fair enough.
I'm sure I'll check in with
And
him.
I mean, I would assume the ones that are charging people don't pay.
Correct.
So maybe that's an assumption. I don't see what's out there, but I would assume that covers everything. But
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure
I'm
I'll
not
check
out
in.
in the field. Yeah.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I have a supplementary, so come back to number 2 that Dr. Shapiro was talking about. And I'm looking at the structure of the question, and if we look at, the setting type A, it doesn't hurt for those, responses to also answer 2A. Means that, you can answer setting A, and answer 2A, and so the setting B and answer 2A. It will be just fine. So I think, that would come, it doesn't change anything. Basically, we just have to have them check, type A or type B, and then, select the setting.
So take out, if you selected a type B setting, just take out,
please
please
select
select the facility or facilities that best describes that entity.
Right,
Well,
then I think we can encompass,
Well, so you're talking about in the box where it says setting type B to get rid of those?
Yes, so,
Okay,
in
well-
2A, that beginning, So we can strike out if you selected a type B setting in question
No.
2.
I think she's just saying strike if you selected a type B. I don't think she's saying take away type A and type B,
Okay,
right?
gotcha.
You're just saying that continue on to question 2A and with it beginning, please select the facility or facilities that best describe that entity.
Oh,
Right?
that becomes question 3, and that becomes,
Got it.
applies to everybody.
Okay.
And then we number the rest of the questions.
Okay, got it.
Okay, Dean.
Dean Porter, California Association for LPCCs. I'm assuming you're sending this questionnaire to California schools and agencies. Do you have any interest in the online programs whose students are getting their practicum experience here in California? Yeah.
I do. I think that was. But
I'll sit down. You don't want to.
I do. What I want to say is that I think that was kind of going to be one of my follow-up questions as we finished here is our distribution and who gets what and how we put it out. So I think that's kind of coming in the next.
Okay.
At the end of our discussion here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk about that for sure.
Okay. Anybody have any other comments on? Okay. Did we get some language from?
I have some language from Jerry on question number 11 about how many sites the students have to choose from or they have difficulty finding placement sites. So here's his suggestion is for the question, how would you characterize the availability of placements for your students? Fewer placements than needed, around the number needed, or more placements than needed?
I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat that. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I was having trouble
Yeah.
getting in between the
Yeah.
hearing over that.
So the question is, how would you characterize the availability of placements for your students? So option A is fewer placements than needed. Option B would be around the number needed, or you could say approximately. Maybe there's a different way to word that. Around the number needed, or more placements than are needed.
So that's, that's more like an opinion, versus the quantifying, how many, the number of it, which is, yeah.
I think so. I think it tells us it'll tell us whether they're struggling or not.
Right,
To
exactly.
place the students, which is sometimes the comments we hear.
Right.
So I think that then that question gets answered for us.
And only those people who are in that locality would know.
Right.
So, yeah.
So to the committee and to staff and folks in the audience, is everybody?
I'm good with that.
Anybody want to have a comment on it? Do you want to repeat it one more time, Roseanne,
Yeah,
for us, and then we'll make a recommendation.
Yeah, and I have a suggestion for part of it. So let me read this again. How would you characterize the availability of placements for your students? A, fewer placements than needed. B, the number of placements are sufficient. Or C, more placements than are needed.
Yeah.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to add that and have that be a recommendation to the board. Yes?
Just keeping in mind one thing that does.
Can you come forward, please, and speak into the mic? Sorry, we want to make sure our folks at home hear.
The only thing that I'd want to mention on that is that it takes the onus completely off of the school in that respect. Like for instance, the Alliant has an agency fair. So the only thing that doesn't sort of address for schools that maybe say that they don't have enough placements for their students, what are they doing to get placements for their students? Because some schools just tell their students to go out and find the stuff on their own. So yeah, I'm not trying to nitpick there, just understanding what you're getting with that question, I guess.
Could we do a subset of the first one where it says no, not enough, and then ask how are students finding their placements, or how are students placed?
How are students?
Or, something to that effect. It's afternoon. I'm dying here.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm just trying to think of what we would be getting out of that question. That.
Here's my example really quickly. I did speak to a student who said her school was not helping her find a placement. Okay. Could have been for a variety of reasons. Maybe they didn't have it. Maybe the interviews they sent her on, she's not a good fit. Okay. I don't know. But, if the school can't place them, what does the student do is what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
So, however, So I think if they check, we don't have enough.
Betty?
I was just going to say that before we ask that question, maybe we could just ask a straightforward question of are students required to find their own placements, or does the school place them?
I think that's already in here.
Yes, is the school primarily, question 3, which will now become 4? So we do get that information, so maybe we don't need to.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
So, no, I didn't see it either.
Okay, so number 3 gets out.
I think at number 3 gets what I would be looking for.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I would just like to underline what Kim just said about students having to find their own placements, particularly with the online programs. I mean, they don't have anybody in California to help them find placements. I think it's a huge problem, and it is an ethical problem. It really should be the school's responsibility to help their students find practicum placements. So I don't know if they'll admit that they're not helping on a survey, but it would be interesting.
Betty?
So do we have any way of capturing the people that are responding are the people that are actually the coordinators? Do we have any way of capturing whether they work for a brick and mortar facility with or an online facility?
We can ask that question.
Don't we have something where they identify? No?
I don't think we talk about where they.
Because that seems to be pretty key, I think. I mean, we talk about what you're setting and where your students are going, but maybe we could ask them to identify. I think we wanted to make it anonymous to a certain extent, I think, but I don't think there's any harm in saying what.
I mean,
what type of
people might select themselves out. There's always that risk. If you're asking a question that could potentially put them in less than optimal light, they could select out of the survey altogether, which would mean we wouldn't get that information.
Yeah, see, I know. If we want to make this somewhat robust, I think we have to determine ahead of time who gets the survey in the sense of who's our sample, right? Who are we sending it to, and have some means of tracking that. If we don't really care and we're just trying to get an idea, it's going to be a very biased survey because it'll be self-selected and people will answer based on, and you may get more of one or the other. So that's why I think we need to have a little discussion about how this gets pushed out.
Will that be helpful if they identify their university they work with? Because right now, it's, you can have, say like, I mean, there are many online programs, and it's the trend also to develop the online program. So it's not just that traditional, classroom, you can have, a mixed mode. So
I have a thought on that. Maybe we could ask them what region of the state they're in, or if they're online. Maybe that gets a little bit of.
I think that takes out I think that puts it in a more kind of way to respond. I think if we ask specific identifiers, people are not going to respond to this.
You don't think so?
No. Or they're not going to maybe be as forthcoming.
Oh, no.
You're
Okay.
right. So if we, wonder if the question could be something, is your degree program delivered in the traditional classroom setting or via online?
Or
It's
both.
Either A or B.
or both.
Okay.
And maybe that's the question at the end of the survey.
Actually, that's strategically a good idea, because if they've invested in completing the survey, if they see it as an innocuous question, that they may be willing to respond, whereas if they see it as early in the survey as potentially reflecting poorly on their institution, they may just opt out altogether.
Right.
And at that one, they could opt out and just not answer it. We still have the information.
Absolutely.
6 hours later at the end of the survey. Okay.
Well, my name's Dave Clark, Couples Resource Collective, and actually, Kim, you had just said everything I was just thinking. I was thinking of saying that it's optional, and whether or not the program is primarily online or primarily in a classroom brick and mortar setting. So that's what I was thinking, and
So
whether it's at the beginning or the end or somewhere in the middle even.
So you think it's important to have that question in there?
I do, and the reason why is because I have received calls from students who were looking for a placement, and I said, so how did you learn about us? Because we weren't at a job fair recently. And they said, oh, my school just gave me your information. And after digging and having more conversation, it was an online school who just went online themselves and went, oh, well, there's this agency near your house, go there. Yeah. And so they weren't working with us, okay, as the assumption is in the language that I've been hearing. So I wanted to make sure that you guys understood that.
Yeah, I think that's important. Thanks.
Okay, so we have the addition of that question regarding whether it's brick and mortar, online, or both. We have the addition of the question of whether folks are being paid or if they're paying or they're not being paid. And then we have the change to question 2A to self-identify regardless of what type you pick. And then we also had one other one that I'm missing, I think.
The reward on number 11.
Oh, the rewording on number 11 that Dr. Shapiro provided.
And number 13.
No, we meant TLPC.
Oh, okay, that's right. Okay.
I'm good with all of that.
All right, everybody good with that?
Yeah, so Jeff just brought me his suggested questions regarding payment of students or pay for supervision, okay, so I want to read those to you. Approximately what percentage of your students are paid during their placement? So percent unpaid, percent paid by stipend, percent paid as employee.
Do we incorporate Roseanne's comment?
That's the next one.
That's
I'll take it
gotcha.
one by one. So will we read it one more time? Mm-hmm. Approximately what percentage of your students are paid during their placement? And then they would have a they would fill in blank percentage unpaid, blank percentage paid by stipend, blank percentage paid as employee.
Okay. It's fine.
Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the next question regarding supervision, approximately what percentage of your students pay for supervision, training, or other fees directly to their sites? Or to their site? Approximately what percentage of your students pay for supervision, training, or other fees directly to their site?
What is the possibility that they pay their supervisor? I don't know. I'm just following. They do. So I'm thinking if it's to the site, then, are we capturing all the...
Yeah. Yeah, please come to the mic.
Yeah, that last question, I don't know if I would put those all into one, because a student might pay for a training at a site, and that's perfectly okay. But to bulk it in with supervision, I think that would be a disservice of the percentage you'd get back.
Please remember to identify yourself when you're speaking on that.
Darlene Davis, Hope Counseling Center.
Thank you, Darlene. Jeffrey Liebert, AMFT California. I actually really appreciate Darlene's comment, and I would imagine at some point maybe it just is impossible to capture everything specifically that we want. So I'm willing to be flexible on this. I think it's just I think we're all in agreement. We need to capture this to some extent.
Yeah. So just do you pay? Do you pay
for supervision?
Or do your students, because this is going to your placement?
Potentially, and I see the response I feel like I'm getting from you guys is that if there is any significant feedback on any of these questions, we could follow it up with another survey that has more specifics.
That's, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe it's just yes/no question. Do they pay for supervision?
Or IDK too? I don't know. I mean, that's actually, you may not know if your students pay for it.
Do you have to pay for your, any fee involved, in your, in terms of, in terms of placement? Because, sometimes, they charge for administrative fees or service fee, according to what Ben's presentation last.
Yeah, so maybe that's the better question. Is there a fee that the student must pay for the placement? Yes, no?
Are there fees involved?
Yeah.
I think that's what Ben was getting at the board meeting in his presentation, and I think that's what we would really want to know.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether there's other fees or training involved, I think we really want to know, are you actually charging people to
do they have to pay?
In addition, that's supposed to be part of their degree.
Yeah.
So are you charging people on top of that? And that'll allow us while we're...
Do you want to clarify that it's outside of tuition or outside of the, because that's what Ben was getting at too. But because one of his remedies was potentially to have it go through the universities with it.
Right, an additional fee.
I haven't forgotten it.
We're getting it.
So, I would say.
So would I leave the question as is then, or would
I think
that still capture?
I think we want to know if the student or / trainer is required to pay additional fees for their placement.
If so, the type, please specific.
Are they paying?
Yeah.
For, what are they paying for?
Right.
I mean, it could be an admin
Maybe
fee,
we let
maybe
them-
it's a supervision
Maybe
fee.
we let them put what,
Right.
describe it?
Yes.
Right.
If I may.
Describe.
If I may, Dave Clark with Couples Resource Collective. What I was going to offer was using Jeff's language, but using those as options with an other at the end for people. So instead of lumping them all together as yes or no, but each one being a checkbox for yes, supervision, yes for extra training, yes for this, or other, what it is. That may be the best of both worlds of what has been proposed. Thank you.
Is that necessarily something the practicum placement coordinator would know, be aware of?
I would think so.
I think,
I would think so, right?
I would think so.
Don't tell me no.
No. I actually land in the place that some may and some may not, and we can take the feedback that we get and go from there. Yeah. So even those that don't.
Maybe we need a box of I don't know, or.
That's what I said, the IDK.
And it may be at the very
IDK
top
box.
of an I don't know option for all of the following questions, kind of a thing, because then there may need to be a potential opt-out option for. It gets kind of redundant to do it on every individual question.
Yeah, I do think it's a good one to do though, because because I also don't know whether when somebody skips a question, is it because they don't know? Did they forget? Did they?
That's fair.
Mm-hmm. So.
Thank you.
All right.
Can I?
Yes, Christy.
So let me give you some wording for that question. Do any of your sites require students to pay fees directly to the site? It's a little repetitive. And then yes for supervision, yes for training, yes other, and then have them fill it out. No and unknown would be the options. So one more time. Do any of your sites, or I guess we could say, do any of your placements, do any of your sites require students to pay fees directly to their site? I'm not sure how to not repeat the word site.
I don't think that it's capturing the actual placement, which is what I think Ben was talking about.
That's why I was recommending outside of tuition.
Outside of tuition. Okay. So what?
Because all these placements have to be done in because through an academic, right? That has to be done through an academic program or course of study. So, and Ben's was that sometimes they have to pay on top of their tuition.
Like a placement.
So I think that was the main crux.
So maybe something like apart from their tuition, are the students required to pay fees directly to their placement sites or agency? Yes.
So other than tuition, are any of your students, because they may not all have that kind of site.
Are any of your students required to pay extra fee or directly to the placement sites or agency? Or site or additional fee? Yeah, or additional fee for placement. Or additional fee involving placement. Because it's really not just to their placement, but they can be charging for, all these additional training and whatnot.
Okay, so that's our last addition question. So Christy, when you work that.
So do we want to start it with other than tuition? Do any of your students require?
Students require.
Do any of your sites
Require students to pay
additional fees?
Additional fees for placement.
Directly to their site, and then yes for placement, yes for supervision, yes for training, or yes other, or no unknown.
Right.
So start with other than tuition. Other than tuition, do any of your sites require students to pay additional fees directly to their site? I'm not sure we need the word additional because we're saying other than tuition.
Yeah, I think it's redundant to say besides tuition because the tuition goes to the university and we're talking about it going to the site, right?
So we can strike the first. And then we just start with, do any of your students require to pay additional fees to their placement sites?
Okay, so the question then would be, do any of your sites require students to pay additional fees directly to the site? And then yes for placement, yes for supervision, yes for training, yes other with a blank, no and unknown.
I think that gets us there.
So would someone like to make a motion to approve those revisions as amended?
Well, I think we maybe need to go through all of them. Yeah, we would have to go through every single change we've made and get.
Okay. I thought we did that previously and we were on the last one, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, the changes that were made today.
Yeah,
to make
I know.
sure.
We just went through them though before we started on this one. This was our last one. We just stated
was
them.
it? Okay.
We just stated them prior to that. You read them to us and then
Well,
we
there's
submitted.
one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's true.
But just go through them for purposes of clarity. Go ahead.
Because I have so many notes, I need to really make sure.
Okay.
Okay.
We want you to be clear.
Yeah. Okay. So we're ready. We're ready to just go through all of them. Okay. So starting at the very top, under goal, determine appropriate work settings for students in practicum or field study who are planning to pursue licensure as an LCSW, LMFT, or LPCC. So that's the change to where we have under goal. Now for question number 1, under what license types are being pursued, we're going to delete LCSW and replace, actually what I want to do is leave it as LCSW and then in parentheses put MSW-mental health concentration.
Okay.
If that's acceptable. Okay. Question number 2A becomes question 3. And we're going to delete the words, if you selected a type B setting in question 2. So the question will start with please, the word please. Question number 4, we're going to change the word oversee to supervise. Okay, question number 10, we're going to delete the third option, which is we don't require it, but we encourage it. Question number 11 is going to be replaced. One second. This is the one that Jerry gave me.
Yes. Going to be replaced with, how would you characterize the availability of placements for your students? Fewer placements than are needed, the number of placements are sufficient, or more placements than are needed. Okay. Number 13 is going to be replaced with, what types of questions or issues have you encountered in applying BBS requirements in the selection of student placements? That's an open-ended question. Number 14 is going to be a box for additional comments, open-ended. Then we have 3 additional questions where I was not given direction on where to place them in the survey. So I might. Just do the wording and
we'll do the wording
figure
then
out.
we'll figure out where to place them. Okay. Is your school's program primarily delivered in a traditional classroom setting, online, or both? So the first option would be primarily traditional classroom setting, primarily online, both. So those would be the 3 boxes. The next, do we want, so let's figure out where to put that one. If you don't mind, let's do that one by one.
I would put that. That one, my suggestion would be at the very last.
I would
Very
agree with
last.
that.
Very last
That was
question.
Betty's recommendation.
Or can it be prior to number 14 before additional comments?
Well, that would work for me too.
That's fine too.
Yeah, because they might get to additional comments and think they're
Yeah,
done.
people always want the additional comments at
Right.
the end, so,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
15. Okay.
The additional fee.
Yes. Approximately what percentage of your students are paid during their placement? So blank percentage unpaid, blank percentage paid by stipend, and blank percentage paid as employee. So they're going to fill in those blanks.
And I think there was an I don't know either, or
Oh yeah, unknown would
an
be.
unknown.
And then, and I think probably both of these questions should be near each other, so I'll go ahead and read the next one. Do any of your sites require students, to pay additional fees directly to the site?
Other than tuition. Is what we had.
we're not.
Did we strike that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's going to have a box for supervision, training, placement, other, unknown.
And no.
And the reason we struck that is because by saying directly to the site, that takes out the tuition component.
Do we need the word additional? I know every time I say that, do any of your sites require students to pay additional fees directly to the site?
I would take out the additional because that's the same
redundancy.
redundancy.
We're just trying to find out if they pay the site.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it introduces confusion, so I would take that up. Okay, so those were all the changes.
And then where do we want to, where would these two questions fit in here?
So I would just make a recommendation that we let you decide where that goes, Roseanne.
Yeah, Christy.
Or sorry, Christy.
Okay.
I think as you get through this, you'll figure out how it flows, if that's the pleasure of the board, committee members. Okay, so we don't really need a motion, we just need to know.
We do.
Well, I was just told by them I don't.
Oh, you don't
You don't.
direct staff to make the changes?
The survey is going to be sent out for the purpose of assisting the committee in carrying out its purpose, which can result in the committee making recommendations to the board. So there's no reason for this to be
board approved.
That's correct. It doesn't have to.
Great.
Okay, all right, so
Like, how
thank
do we
you.
make the
Thanks
motion,
for your
right?
patience, everybody. And, sorry.
Who will the survey be sent to?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
what we
that's
need
the
to talk
next
about
piece.
next. And how we determine.
Anybody and everybody?
Yeah.
So we have I believe we have a mailing list of all of our our LPCC and LMFT programs. We also have the MFT consortium, which is also LPCC consortium.
Right.
They work together. And then for social work, we have the
I know we have a
field.
Deans and directors.
Thank
deans
you.
and director, yeah.
Yes, CalSWEC. Yes, we have
Not
Cal.
CalSWEC.
It's not anymore.
Deans and directors.
Deans and directors.
Okay, Deans and Directors Association.
If you need help, just let me.
Okay. So this is going to go up to all the schools that we are aware of, and mostly you'll see on our website, and then a few of the others, maybe the online, because I think we might have some online on the website.
So I think it will be appropriate to send to like the School of Social Work, the field educator, the field director, the field education director. That would be, the point person.
Well, they all, with the list that we have, they pinpoint, I'm flashing on academic officer, but I don't think that's the right title, but we do have a point of contact at each school that's in charge of that program.
That's the director of field education.
So that would, it'll get to the right person, yeah.
The liaison.
That kind of brings up the question, so I know with like MFT programs, there's different people involved at the school.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to be more narrowly focused on the person primarily responsible for that, like the head of it, or?
That's our point of contact, and if they're not the right person to answer the question, then perhaps we can include a letter in there that says, please, we're looking at the field placement, please forward to that person.
So we don't want multiple people from one school responding?
No.
Okay.
I think just one school.
Okay.
One per school.
Do our professional organizations have can they help in any way in getting the word out as well?
Jan Lee just offered. And we can call the consortium group is really
We really want to get it out to as broad an audience as possible. So we like I mean, if there's suggestions from folks that are here to let us know, please let us know.
So Darlene Davis, on behalf of the MFT stipend program, we do have a list of each MFT school with the representative and their email and their phone number. So we're just updating that right now.
Perfect.
It should be done in the next 2 weeks because Lisa Wolf is going on vacation, but we can get that to you.
Great.
Yeah, for the MFTs.
Yes, perfect.
And, okay,
Dean probably has a list too.
I'll let Dean go.
Dean Porter, CalPIC. As the afternoon goes on, my title gets shorter. We do have a consortium as well that is not combined with the MFT. I think the consortia that you are referring to is sponsored by CAMP and maybe AMP, but we do convene a consortium of those with LPCC programs. But we get our mailing list from your school list. So if you're going to use your school list, you'll probably hit those who don't have a combined program, who have a standalone LPCC program.
Okay.
The next question I had was, do we want to have is this going to be a paper survey or an electronic survey?
Electronic, for sure.
Yeah, okay. I was going to make that recommendation.
Yeah.
And if so, do we want to have an option to have it on our website, or do you want to have it, I mean, where anybody can?
I would say no on this one. We
Okay.
want one response per school. We need to be
Okay.
targeted.
So be very specific in who we solicit the information from. Okay. Okay. Everybody okay with that? Okay. So I think we're going to move on to the next agenda item. If anybody has anything else to add or comments, you know how to get in touch with us. So thank you. All right, next agenda item is our other survey, right? Yeah. So this is a survey that's going out to, oops, I just passed it up. Yeah, this survey that's going out to our, more of our, just about our settings. So this is, okay. Do you want to start with that, Christine? Just go over that.
This is our more general survey where we're trying to gather general information about different types of work settings and then go into more depth about exempt settings in particular. So we worked with the Office of Professional Examination Services with the department to develop the draft survey. They worked with us on this other survey as well. Just failed to mention it there. We originally drafted it with BBS licensees and registrants as the population that would be responding, but at the last meeting we discussed including agency directors for exempt settings. There's an association where we can, that will help us get the survey out to that population, and I believe this would be one that we would put on our website. We would want to, for sure, and do it electronically, because we do want broad participation. So the goals of the survey are primarily to determine whether consumers are being harmed in exempt settings by unlicensed staff who are not pursuing licensure as a mental health professional and who are performing clinical services. We also want to help formulate a legal definition for private practice, exempt, and other types of settings, and really broadly to kind of gather some information that will help inform any decisions that the committee might be wanting to make. Another thing that has been kind of a weakness for us is understanding the different types of settings that are out there just in general, and whether they're for-profit or how they're organized, because sometimes the technicalities as to whether a setting is appropriate or acceptable comes down to those little details. So those are some. So the draft survey was presented to the committee back in March, and we had some changes suggested, those that are shown in underline and in a different color. As I was reviewing the materials, it dawned on me the way the introduction was reading might discourage some people from responding to the survey if they don't work in an exempt setting. And we want broad participation because we're also trying to gather information about other types of settings. What is out there? What's the universe out there of the types of settings people are working in? Because part of what we need to do is also describe what is private practice. Kaiser's not a private practice, but what are they?
We discussed this. How do you define that? Nobody really has a definition. Yeah.
So I reworded the introduction, and that's the handout that you have. So there's a revised introduction. The second page shows it as it would read if we were to make all of the changes. It's kind of hard to read sometimes with all the strikeouts. So I tried to reword it so that people who work in settings other than just an exempt setting would not stop and say, oh, this doesn't apply to me. We want your response anyway. I guess I can go ahead and read through it. The Board of Behavioral Sciences is conducting a survey of agency directors as well as BBS registrants and licensees. The purpose of the survey is as follows: to gather information regarding different types of work settings in which clinical services are provided, and to gather information regarding the clinical services provided to consumers by unlicensed staff working in exempt settings as defined below. An exempt setting is currently defined in law as a governmental entity, a school, or an entity that's both nonprofit and charitable, a 501c3. Such settings are permitted by law to provide clinical services, assessment, diagnosis, and or treatment through unlicensed staff members who are not pursuing licensure as a mental health professional. All registrants, licensees, and agency directors are encouraged to complete the survey regardless of work setting type. Please answer the following questions based on your current primary work setting in which clinical services, assessment, diagnosis, and or treatment are provided, period. That's the introduction, okay.
All right, thanks. I think that's very clear. That's nice.
Good.
Anybody have any comments on that? Rebecca?
I have one question.
Or questions?
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. So your definition of exempt setting, is that entire paragraph what's in law?
No, it's not a direct quote from the law. Like it doesn't say 501c3.
I guess the reason I'm asking, so to get the very last part, through unlicensed staff members who are not pursuing licensure as a mental health professional, they may or they may not be. You know what I mean? Should it be may not be pursuing instead of are not pursuing?
Okay, who may not be.
Okay.
Thank you.
I like that.
It takes a village.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an attorney job.
Good thing we have some smart people in there. All right. So do you want to go through and just maybe, I think there wasn't a ton of substantial changes in there from what I remember reading.
Yes.
But do you want to point anything out, Christy, that you want us to be aware of?
Let's see here. Question 7A, given the change we just made in the introduction, who are not seeking licensure as a mental health professional, I'm wondering if we should, who may not be.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Same for question 8.
Mm-hmm. I had a semantic suggestion on 8.
On number 8, okay.
Do you want it now?
Sure.
So the second box,
Mm-hmm.
I think that we need to look at the wording on that and have it either be life experience or personal experience. I don't know, lived experience.
Yeah, I think that's a term that is kind of used in the field, but I think it would be better to state it a little more clearly. So
Maybe personal.
Personal, yeah, I like
My
that.
suggestion, yeah, either personal experience or personal worked for me.
I thought the same thing.
That works.
I thought the same thing.
Okay.
'Cause I don't use that term of art.
Yeah, but
Are you okay with that?
No. Christy's right. You'll see that when they talk about like peer counselors, you'll see that definition, lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But I think if we say personal experience, people will certainly know
They'll know
what that means.
Yeah,
And
it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody's okay with that one? Christine?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Okay. I'm looking to our licensed LCS over there. Okay. All right.
So number 9, I would make that same change again, who may not be seeking licensure. Same thing in number 10. And 11, we use that phrase a lot.
And 12 as well, I see right there, right?
11 and 12, yeah. And 13.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's anything that I have questions on as far as, there was no major changes other than deleting question 11 and 13B. We added an open-ended question, so it's pretty basic.
Okay, Betty?
I had another just comment in terms of the readability and flow. It would seem that the first few questions are just getting information about where people are working.
Yeah.
And then the whole later part of the survey has to do with what we're really trying to get at with the exempt settings.
Right.
I guess I had a question about the positioning of number 6, in that if we want to have people who are not working in exempt settings, you know, just do a relatively short survey and then out, it would seem that the shortage of licensed mental health professionals, I mean, isn't that kind of more related to working in an exempt setting?
Might be.
So strategically, I was just wondering if we wanted to have them, you know, if
move that later in the survey.
If yes, or if no, stop here, and if yes, keep going, kind of thing. The question,
Oh, I see
so
what you're
the
saying.
yes, no, stop here, unknown kind of thing. It seemed like if we moved 6 down below that, then we're opting them out of that. I don't know. It's probably a minor change, but it just seemed like some of that stuff got really redundant if, in fact, it's just general information about the site. So
I think that question 6 probably is more pertinent to exempt settings because those are the type of settings that would be most impacted, I think.
And that's why we want to know, is if it's if they're using a lot of unlicensed people because there's a shortage, because of whatever. But it just seems like we want them to opt out as soon as possible, so they're not going, oh, we have to look at that question again, kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Because we just answered that.
So where would you move it to, Betty?
After
7A?
After the opting out.
All right, so
After the yes, no, unknown.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
So that number 6 is tied with number 5, because you first ask them, you know, where the county is located, where the county of the facility is located, and then you talk about whether that county, you know, or the region of the county has a shortage of mental health provider. So, you know, if you have, you know, if we want to move it, then we will need to move number 5 also.
I would be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, because those two link
It keeps
together.
It actually seems to flow at that point.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like those changes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Anybody in the?
I noticed on 2B, it says church/religious institution. I would recommend just saying religious institution. And then in 2, it says church. And in 7, it says church. So I would just replace those with religious institution.
Just take out church, or delete the word church and leave it as religious. And where was it, what, I missed this.
Okay, there's
2B.
2B, get
Right.
rid of
Church.
just have religious institution. On 2, it says church. So make that religious institution. Same thing with 7.
Now, the thing is, the law, how is the law written?
I don't think the law says church. I think, and maybe it does.
Is the facility, let me see, is the facility any of the types? Is the facility any of the types of stroke that is in 7. That's just a typo. Types of exempt settings listed below. Yeah.
This is a priest, rabbi, or minister of the gospel of any religious denomination in terms of individuals who are exempt from licensure.
So if we say religious institution, that kind of covers it.
I think so. Okay.
I think it's more inclusive.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's, all right. Anybody else have any other comments on that survey? Okay. I like it. I think it looks good. I'm excited to get all this information back. I can't wait to see more about who are the people we're impacting lives of, right? Yeah, we can. So I think everybody's okay with that. We approve that as a committee. And I just really quickly, I think I want to take a 5-minute break real quick, but I do want to ask our member and professional organizations out there, if you could please get the word out to your membership about participating in the survey. This is one we want to get as broad a brush as possible, and we're going to have to rely on your urging of folks to go to the website and get that information to us. So please, and university folks too. Thank you. All right, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, or actually I say 10, I guess, and come on back at, what is it, 3, let's be back at 3:20. Thanks. The survey, we're hoping, will be available online by the end of July, and that's both surveys will be finished and out and ready. And I think we're going to maybe give 4 weeks or so to get back to us, and then have results back to this committee by our September meeting. Okay?
So one suggestion, I think the school, I'm not sure when the university people are going to come back. So because it's summertime. So yeah. So maybe if you can extend it till at least about right around middle of August, so you have a little more chance that the faculty will be back and be able to answer the email.
So that one survey, the first survey we looked at, maybe that one give a longer time frame.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of the squishy timeline. We also had a request to change our agenda and switch up items 6 and 7 and take item 7 first on the discussion and possible action regarding Business and Professions Code regarding the 90-day rule. And if there's no problem with that, I'd like to just suggest we take that first. All right? Okay. And I'm going to turn it over to Kim, who's going to lead the discussion on this.
Okay. So for those of us who may not be familiar with the 90-day rule, this has been included in the LMFT licensure law for a number of years. I think we've been able to track it back as far as 1984. And when the LPCC licensure law was created, that Practice Act was modeled after the LMFT law and also included the 90-day rule. Currently, LCSW law does not contain the 90-day rule, yet there is a proposal currently in the legislature, Assembly Bill 456, to allow LCSWs to participate in the 90-day rule. Historically, it looks like the purpose of the rule was to assist recent graduates in obtaining, in gaining their supervised hours, get them going on it during the time they were waiting for their registration number. For a variety of reasons, perhaps how workload, processing times and such, and that might have been the motivating factor at that time. Right now, the board is striving to keep all its registration processing timelines under 30 days, yet when we do, there are, outliers where the processing time can increase. So seasonality of applications, sometimes budget constraints have impacted that, or furloughs, and that's impacted our processing times. Additionally, up until the introduction of live scan, fingerprints were manually submitted. They were submitted on hard cards. And so those hard cards, the processing of that was labor intensive, and it did take a long time to get the results back. With the implementation of live scan, traditionally we're now looking at a 3 to 7 day wait period to get results back on fingerprints. Yet I really want to stress that the intent and the interpretation of the 90-day rule by BBS and its stakeholders was never to encourage or sanction an unregistered person providing clinical services. So the way that 90-day rule is applied is if an individual submits their application for registration to the board within 90 days of the date that their degree was awarded, and that individual is subsequently issued a registration number, the individual has the opportunity to count their hours between the time of graduation and the time that they're issued a registration number. So it's a retroactive application. And you can, look at maybe 100 hours, couple hundred hours, depending on how long it takes to get the registration issued. An applicant whose application is subsequently denied because they cannot be granted a criminal background clearance does not get that opportunity, and does not. So, and then historically what we typically wait on at this particular time is now the transcripts. The issuance of the official transcripts from the schools is primarily the reason for the delay in issuing a registration. So that's how the 90-day rule works. It also, the 90-day rule does not affect the ability of agencies to hire interns, and the employment setting can maintain their independent protocols regarding interviews and background checks for each applicant. The other thing that we're learning is a lot of, as we heard a little bit earlier, a lot of these interns or these individuals are continuing on in these settings where perhaps they were gaining their practicum hours, so you have a continuity of care for the clients in place. The agency benefits in that, you have a seasoned employee and things tend to run smoothly. So during the work of the Supervision Committee, we conducted a survey of supervisees and supervisors, and it came to our attention, one of the takeaways from that survey is that most of these individuals are gaining their hours in a nonprofit agency or a government agency. So essentially these are exempt work settings. Technically you don't need a license to work there, and which is why we have the exempt committee. Yet it's interesting to note that a lot of the hiring protocols at these facilities do require a background check, a fingerprint clearance. So that's in place. And finally, none of the applicants can work in a private practice until they have their registration number from the board. So that's sort of the history and the background of the 90-day rule. Moving forward to today, a little more history. 2012, we actually sought legislation to eliminate the 90-day rule. And it was primarily concerned that perhaps those applicants who couldn't get a criminal background clearance could essentially game the system and continue to work without a registration because you had a year to provide your explanation or requisite documents to explain your criminal conviction and what you have done to rehabilitate yourself. So you have a year to do that. So you could essentially work for a year without a registration in an exempt or non-profit agency. And gosh forbid anything happen, there's nothing we can do because we don't have jurisdiction there. This effort in 2012 was not successful. We abandoned that effort, not having an author. And so now that brings us to the present day. Recently, with the introduction of AB 93, although it did well in the Assembly, it got to the Senate for a hearing, and there was a concern raised about the 90-day rule, in that it seemed to suggest that the board was allowing registrants, unlicensed people without a background clearance to work. And so that became a very big public protection issue. And so we've been asked to take a look at that now and see what we can do, what safeguards we can put in place, and just discuss the application of the 90-day rule. Within this discussion, obviously our mandate is consumer protection. Of course, we have other requirements as a regulatory agency, but if push comes to shove, the highest priority is consumer protection. The fingerprint clearance, yes, is an essential component to provide consumers protection from unsafe mental health practitioners. So, it's a critical piece, but I think the discussion really is, about the 90-day rule and any possible solutions that we can consider that can provide consumers protection without any adverse consequences to our registrants and people who are trying to enter the field. Also, this discussion really also needs to include parity amongst the 3 license types as well. What's good for one should be good for all. So things that I think that just to get the discussion started is, should we eliminate the 90-day rule? And essentially, if we do, that means the board would only permit the counting of any supervised hour after the registration is issued. If we don't eliminate the 90-day rule, what safeguards could we establish to improve consumer protection if the 90-day rule remains in effect? Couple of examples, maybe a time period, a limit on how long an unregistered person can be providing clinical services while they're waiting for the registration. Or, another alternative is allow only the counting of non-clinical hours by the registrant in a 90-day rule, keeping that effective. So things like case management, things like intake, things like client advocacy, those types of things. None of those activities require a license or a registration. And, consider the effect of any solution that we come up with that would impact the continuity of care of the client. Yes, there is a process to terminate your client, but, you're in school, you're coming up on graduation, it's an exciting time, and wow. So, and I don't know that having a revolving door with a lot of different practitioners is really beneficial to a client. Do any solutions require any modification to our existing database system? Does it increase or reduce our workload? Is it redundant? Do I need additional staff? Do any of our solutions arbitrarily create an unnecessary barrier to licensure or employment? And finally, are there any unintended consequences? So with that, I think I will throw it out to our stakeholders. And like we've always done, I'm looking to our collaboration to, here's the idea, let's see what we can come up with together. All right.
So I have a question now. So I know for just being, the supervisor for the ASWs, so once they graduate without, because there's no 90-day rules, so normally they cannot perform any clinical services. So, I guess that, if let's say they are allowed with the 90-day rules, all the registrants are allowed to, to perform the clinical services, and yet not counting the hours. It just seems like, it's a little muddy for me.
I agree.
Because, so, why would you allowing them to perform the services without a license, and yet, some of the other professional that, you cannot really practice clinical services without, it's just muddy. And the other thing is about the current concern, the current issue. I'm not quite getting what really is the substance of it. Because, partly we talked about, the fact that in the exams, a lot of the exam setting, they've already do the fingerprinting. And then the other one is like they're doing, allowing the unregistered individual providing mental health services without a fingerprint. So what particulars setting that we're talking about? Or
it is the entire perception that somebody is out there working without a license. And then that is somehow a danger to the consumer. And that is a consumer protection issue.
So is it perception or is it the fact?
It's the perception.
Okay. So because,
And the reality of it is, yes, you have for a period of time somebody that does not hold a license or a registration with the BBS providing those services. But the reality also includes that most of those services are in a setting where we have absolutely no jurisdiction.
Right.
But, and so then that, from those two lenses came the comments that, you know, how much consumer harm is there? Has anyone ever been hurt? When we shopped the bill in 2012 to get rid of the 90-day rule, we were consistently asked, I think we saw 23 offices.
About 25.
Yeah, and each and every office was, okay, so where's your data? Where's your data that there is harm? We didn't have it in 2012. I don't have it now, because to our knowledge, we have never had a complaint.
Right.
These individuals are supervised, so there is, that level of protection. But there seems to be the idea that they're out there without a fingerprint clearance, when in reality, most of the time they're waiting on the transcripts. The fingerprint clearance is here, it's there. We're just waiting to issue the registration because I need the transcript from the school.
Right.
So that's sort of the challenge. The flip side of that is that for some, yeah, maybe we got a hit, and maybe we are waiting to decide whether we want to allow that person with the DUI or the petty theft to continue through. We do have a process in place in our enforcement unit for those quick hits, where we call them a quick review. Basically, if you've got a conviction that's 10 years old, provided it's not murder, but it's a DUI, petty theft, different, things like that, but you've shown sufficient rehabilitation in that you've changed your lifestyle choices, you have a good system of support in place, and then you've gone on to get your master's degree program, and then we look at your GPA and your 3.8, and you've got great letters of recommendation. A little hard to say no to that application, so those go through, and we look at those really quick. They get in, they get out. The ones that we keep are the ones that we have concerns with.
Right.
And that's a pretty small population of people, but it is now become a perception concern, and that's where it's landed. So now we need to have the discussion about what, if anything, we're going to do.
Can we hear from Jeffrey? All right, Jeffrey, go ahead.
I can be patient if it's helpful. Really, you kind of mentioned some of the things that I was hoping to talk about regarding like jurisdiction and the fact that a lot of these people can continue to work in these exempt settings, partially the reason why we have this committee in the first place. So the comment that we at AMFT would like to make we could probably use much stronger language, but we want to keep the 90-day rule, and as strongly as possible, we would like to say that. Removing or amending the 90-day rule would likely not impact the actual work that's being done by a vast majority of those in between that graduation and receiving your internship registration, associate registration number, and it would actually more likely impact whether that work count towards licensure. That seems like the difference that this would cause. And so by limiting it, it really only causes practical consequences that it takes people longer to get their license.
Exactly.
So we would like to keep that 90-day rule because really it seems like it just helps people to get their license faster.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Betty?
Well, my thought is we're addressing a perception. So if the basis of the perception is that there are people who are dangerous in that they're not fingerprint cleared, for the limited number of people for whom it would apply, because again, it's going to be the few people who are not working in exempt settings, could we add some language that says that the 90-day rule would start as soon as the fingerprints cleared?
We could. All possibilities are open. I'm trying to think about how that would, because at some point we would have to notify them that they're good to go.
Right. So, I mean, my initial thought on that was that's going to be a huge hit on staff time. But then I kind of went back to how many licensees are we really talking about, since it wouldn't apply to anyone working in a governmental agency, all of those other settings, which are probably going to be the majority of the folks,
Right.
it may be that it's a relatively small number of licensees that we would actually have to, but it would certainly address the perception. I think my issue is if we're going to try and address the perception and not just move forward with it, that's certainly a way to address the perception.
So I think in terms of, if we were to move forward with that, we would need to think in terms of what staff we would need to ask for in order to, because I guess we would have to send out a letter to everybody once we got their fingerprint clearance, correct? So.
And then that requires another tracking.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just briefly, that's a checkbox that already exists in Breeze, because that automatically fulfills when the fingerprints are imported, correct? And then a letter.
So once they got their letter, then they would know that they could start, from the date of the letter, they could count hours. So is the letter something we could automatically generate, or does that require, and then what about the people that don't get the letter because we got a hit?
Right.
I think that letter would just, so it would go out, let's say I think the people that it would, I mean, you're talking about, you'd get a letter, but you'd still might be held up because of you haven't got your degree, you haven't got your paperwork from the school yet. I don't know if that's, I mean.
Yeah, because we talked about that too.
I mean, you can definitely, in Breeze, I'm sure we can make it work where once you get your fingerprint clearance, it generates a letter and sends it out, but then you're sending the letter pretty much to everybody.
And you're looking at roughly 7,000 to 9,000 applicants?
A year.
A year.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is we would have to be careful of is risking, when we send out the letter, making sure that nobody gets the false perception if not reading the letter or whatever, that they're now good to go.
Yeah, that's would be my concern. Was like, oh, now I've got my license, I can practice, even though.
Now I'm registered, even though I'm not. I didn't read the letter, but exactly. I think I heard from the BBS that I'm good.
Yeah, I know that would be difficult. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I just want to echo that same comment and the fact that telling people about regulations seems to confuse them, unfortunately. And so pushing this out to people when we've just kind of decided that it's probably a really small group of people that it applies to, now you potentially are confusing thousands of people who don't need confusion. Yeah. I'm just thinking about the work that might come back on you with those questions. So thank you.
Suggestion.
Yeah, sounds like a great one on the surface.
That's what we call brainstorming.
Yeah, it's a challenge because I really don't want to impede the employment yet. I know that we haven't finished the exempt setting yet and safeguards there. That's why I was thinking, maybe we only count non-clinical. Then late this morning, someone suggested to me maybe we put a cap on the clinical. You can count between, before the 90, before you get your registration. Maybe there's a cap. I don't, because I don't know.
It's going back to his
the
confusion
buckets
thing. I know. And our bucket discussion, which has been close. Dean?
Dean Porter, CalPEC. Do we know of any other licenses that are where the applicants are allowed to start doing the work that the license requires before they receive the license?
You mean
or the registration in this case? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that would be good information to get. I know that there was a couple of questions in the survey as I was looking at today's stuff, and I thought, this would be good information for the 90-day rule, and this would be good. There's 2 questions, but that particular one I don't know. But we could certainly survey, the Healing Arts boards here in DCA and just say, do you allow them to do anything?
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's why we kind of stick out when our bill, AB 93, went to the Senate BNP. They were not used to seeing people start to work before they were registered or licensed. So it's
I think
maybe
that could have
something
been
unique.
part of it. I think the Thurman bill, the other bill, the companion bill might have highlighted it.
Yes.
Yet, you know, we're baffled in-house because that code section's been before
Yeah.
the legislature, that committee, since 2010.
Yeah,
in
but we
various
may have
shapes
a
and
very
forms.
thorough consultant who, you know, looked at that and thought, wait a minute. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
To answer your question, I don't think we're going to find a lot of cases where you're counting pre-registration, because I think we're kind of a unique circumstance because MFTs have always been allowed to count pre-degree hours, and so that kind of lends itself to you're in the setting, you're already working, so they stay on with their same site. So I think that it's kind of a unique situation with the way that our law is structured versus others. I think you're going to find if you look at, I know the psychology board doesn't allow it. I think if you look at a lot of other professions, you're not going to find the same setup. So I don't think we should hinge our discussion on whether or not we find anything there, because I don't think it's going to necessarily solve our issue, which is more unique to us.
Which is really probably pertains more to the MFTs than either the social workers or the LPCCs, because I would think our members could wait for a month and get all their paperwork started and then start earning their hours. And the LMFTs are already able to earn, 1,300 of their hours as students, so they have a good head start. Anyway, I think it'll really be up to the MFTs to say how important this is to them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right on cue. Dave Jensen,
Yeah.
Camp. We like the 90-day rule. We really wouldn't want to see it go away. We think we're kind of penalizing the ones who are doing what they're supposed to. You know, they graduate, they do good work, they're seeing clients, they're performing well, the agencies want to keep them, and now we're saying, oh, you know, you're not going to be able to count up to, 90 days. So we would really like to see the 90-day. Maybe 90 days is too long, and the world's changed a little. If we're concerned about a window, maybe a 30-day or 45-day window, as opposed to, try to reduce the risk as much as possible. But to me, ultimately, if they want to force a hand here, it's on the exempt settings. Make them fingerprint everybody, that works there. They have control over that. You guys don't have control over the exempt staff. The other idea we were talking about the other day was, would the BBS consider allowing trainees to apply much earlier? And so maybe the last thing that gets cleared is the transcript, not sort of in the middle of the process. But if we're trying to shorten that time period as much as possible, maybe you guys could move a little on the on the front nine as opposed to the back nine. But historically, it's been an important feature in terms of the landscape of our scope of practice. Really wouldn't want to see it go away, but and then also I think parity is important. If it's going to be the rule for us, it really should be the rule for the big three as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. I also want to make a pitch for parity. But I also, and I've discussed this with Kim and Roseanne, I do have a concern for those applicants who do have a past criminal record. I know that through your enforcement unit, you look at them in a case-by-case basis. A lot of these folks are cleared eventually, and so I'm concerned that any kind of fix we make, I don't want to unduly penalize these people who are going to get a hit on their fingerprints. But in most cases, my understanding, I can't give an exact percentage, but I'm pretty sure it's well over 90%. They are cleared for licensure. So I just really want to keep that out there. And also, people with a past criminal record that have overcome it and gotten their master's degrees, they are really valuable in this profession. And they could really help other people with what they've been through. And I really don't want to make it harder for those folks.
Dave Clark with Couples Resource Collective. I remember when I was a trainee, and I remember a few folks who had to deal with having had past DUIs, and the amount of time it took for them to get clearance and such, and having to go get letters from people, etc. What I'm wondering is if there is I think David mentioned something of this, in a sense of being able to apply earlier so that the information is done while they're in their training period, so that the last thing is their transcripts. But even at that, having the school send over an unofficial transcript to show that they are at that place in their last semester. Because if they cover everything else up to that point, then all they have is that one last semester to fill. And then the other piece of it is, if we're allowed to count our hours and all of a sudden now you're not, and then now you can, and then the other impact is the economic impact upon that for those that their employment may hinge upon being approved and these other pieces. So if we take these things out, it may actually affect people's living or their ability to find living as it is. Because you can work in an exempt setting and during that 90 days, but you can't work in a private practice, which means that invariably anybody going to private practice is already at an economic disadvantage for the same thing. But if they were able to have the screening done ahead of time, then they would be put into the same pocket and not disadvantaged like the people that are in an exempt setting.
So when you talk about early application, at what point would, so you're in your last year of your degree program, so would you think, are we talking like the last semester?
Right, at the beginning of the last semester.
At the beginning of the last semester.
Right.
So they would have...
Because they would have at that point been in most likely at least one semester worth of practicum, but would still have another 1 to 2 more semesters, depending on the program. Some programs are longer for their practicum, but they're usually a year just about where they fit. So maybe it's to start practicum. This is one of the requirements that you have to do it. Your practicum isn't contingent upon the application and the review, because they are in an exempt setting, but at least get that done when they start the exempt setting, most likely as a trainee. Then that way everything is done ahead of time, and for you guys, it's just a matter of checking a box. I mean, you'll have completed everything else already. You're not changing anything other than where the work is in the timeline.
Right. I actually really like that suggestion, but we can talk a little bit more.
Thank you.
Okay. And you're not suggesting that they need the fingerprint clearance before they start their practicum, just clear up any issues, work on that at that point in time.
Right, so have them do the fingerprint. If it comes back and there's an issue, then they also have the opportunity, since they have a year to respond and figure that out, rather than delaying both their work in the field and potential for that cause of harm. Because if you catch it sooner, then they can go through that process sooner. There's less risk as well.
Jeffrey Liebert, MFT California. The first that I'm hearing of this kind of a proposal, and it's actually really interesting. I'd be curious to hear more information about kind of what you guys are talking about. In terms of David, correct? Something that David suggested was shortening the time from 90 days maybe down to 30 or 45. And we at MFT would prefer that rather than splitting from non-clinical to clinical. And just another side note, I know it's probably no longer taking you guys anywhere near 90 days to approve a lot of those things, and I know that that's why that 90 days was there in the beginning. So to shorten it kind of mirrors the process that you guys have been able to shorten your approval process.
Right, and shortening the process I don't think is not necessarily problematic for us. It's still, you're letting somebody count those hours. And that's the issue. And you're letting people who aren't registered, I mean, and whether I agree with it or not, the concern is you're still letting someone who doesn't have a registration with BBS count those hours towards licensure. And we all understand that that's an accounting kind of retroactive problem, but from the other side of the table, it's a perception that we're allowing unlicensed, unregistered people to do those services. So,
correct.
If shortening it works. But there has to be another piece to address the concern about consumer protection.
I understand, and I guess that was my intention of suggesting a shorter time, as that may help people to feel like there is more protection in place, less time to maybe cause harm.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I hear what you're saying. Thank you. Thank you.
Jerry Shapiro, San Francisco State. I'd like to speak in support of some of, I think, very creative proposals that are coming forward. Just in terms of articulating with the higher education system there is a formality in spring semester where individuals have to apply for graduation, are cleared in terms of advancement to candidacy. And there may be a way of coordinating those times with the paperwork required by the board so that there could be this smooth transition. There could be documentation that provides the board with safety in terms of there being a necessary check. The fingerprinting could be on, put into the system at that point. And I think it provides support for the idea that what the board is looking towards is protecting the consumers in the state of California by putting together a continuum of professional development. A recognition that it is an ongoing process with the board being actively involved in a deliberate and meaningful way at each stage of the professional's development accomplishments. That may be a way of communicating to the legislature that this really is an extension of an internship where they have already been applying their knowledge and skills and providing services to the community. This is merely a formalization and a smooth transition to the licensing process where information is provided in a timely and responsible way. And that may, and I don't know, you also could come up with data that supports how it makes the administrative end of all of this work easier by collecting the information earlier. But I think this is very, a creative direction to move in, and I think I can just speak for the CSU system. I think they'd be really open to talking further about how to streamline this process. So I'm glad that we're all talking.
Me too. Thank you. Darlene?
Darlene Davis, Hope Counseling Center. A couple things, I like all the ideas as well. I think shortening the time is probably not going to work for the universities because it's the transcripts now that are taking so long to come in. So I like the idea of fingerprinting sooner in their schooling. As far as consumer protection, if they're not counting the hours, but they're still seeing the clients, we're not really protecting the consumer. And as an agency, if I'm imagining we're one of those agencies where the trainees come in, we start with trainees and they stay on as interns. We interview them because they become employees after that. If they can't count the hours, I can imagine some of them are going to leave. And I foresee clients being pushed around from practitioner to practitioner or telling them, sorry, we can't see you for 90 days until the person gets their intern registration. So I would hate for that 90 days to go away. They are being supervised, and we're taking some of that liability on, so I'm not going to keep anyone on that isn't practicing in a safe manner. And I was texting one of my colleagues in one of the bigger agencies, Stanford Youth Solutions, that has county contracts. And when they're in that 90-day place, then they kind of move them into doing more rehabilitation and case management, as you're talking about. But again, the consumer is being switched up because of this technicality.
So I'm wondering if we, just devil's advocate here, so if we said, okay, spring graduation season, send me your application and send me your fingerprints, and then once we say, okay, we got a clearance from your, no problem, we're comfortable with those folks counting the 90 days until, and the 90-day rule applies, and maybe the language is, if you got a fingerprint clearance from the board. Mm-hmm. And then everybody else is just, you're waiting until we get your background check. So, I mean, you're looking at, if we did something like that, the impact would be to probably initially the 5%, 7% that we get hits on. Mm-hmm. Most of that population gets cleared pretty quickly. So then the only outliers that I could see would be the ones that we have some serious concerns, and obviously maybe even if I deny them, they can't count the hours anyway.
Right. And I can't speak for every agency, but I know the larger agencies that do have county contracts, if you have something on your record you don't get to see clients until that's all cleared up.
Right.
And in my agency, if you have something on your record and your intern number is gonna be postponed, then I also move you into another position until you get that cleared up. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Hi, Jerry Grossman. I'm wondering if there could be a time constraint on a university sending on a transcript, because that could foreshorten the period of time. And if the transcript could be transmitted electronically, if that would be acceptable to the board. And therefore, this idea of like moving this process along could be furthered by those steps.
So if we were to do that, then there would be no 90-day rule. Is that what you're saying, or just in addition to?
Well, no, it would just shorten the 90 days.
Okay.
Then universities are required to submit an application, the transcript to the board within a much shorter period of time, rather than whatever they can do it.
Okay.
Dean Porter, CalPIC, I wonder if we could clarify what the 90 days are referring to. My understanding is you have 90 days to apply. And as long as you've done that, you get to work without a registration for a full year.
Or until the registration is issued.
Or what?
Until the registration is issued.
Right.
The kicker is, I graduate June 1st. And my degree is confirmed on June 1st. I have to submit my application within 90 days of that date.
Right. So those are, we're really talking about up to a year that somebody can work without being registered.
Yep.
It's not just 90 days they can work without being registered. So I just thought we ought to clarify that.
Right, it can be. More often than not, it's not exactly 90 days. Not now. I would say furloughs, oh yeah. I would say probably in 1995, probably, because they were doing hard cards. It would take them more than 90 days to get registration.
If you just submit your application within that 90-day window, you can start counting your hours, right? Or are we saying within the 90 days, the board has to receive the application and the fingerprint check?
We just say submitted.
Submitted.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to look at, what we mean by the 90-day rule, and maybe we could shorten up that up to a year that is possible now. If we say, you need to apply within 90 days of degree conferral, but that lets you work for X number of days or months until the registration is granted, but no more than that, because the year is what seems like a long time to me.
Thank you.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. Going back to what you said earlier, Kim, when we were talking about submitting paperwork in the spring semester, and for the people who have a hit on the fingerprints that are cleared quickly, were you actually thinking that maybe they could be cleared before they graduated? Okay. Okay. And then just to clarify a little bit about what you were saying, and make sure I understand it, on that whole year, that really has to do for people who, they applied within 90 days, they probably had a hit on their fingerprints, and they had to remediate part of their application. They have up to a year to remediate their application, but a more typical scenario is somebody applies within the 90 days, they get cleared, and they get their registration from the BBS really quickly. There's no...
Generally,
yeah. But like I said,
we're getting everything out within 30 days, but we're now at graduation season, so I could see that stretching out to be about 45, maybe 60 days for registration.
Right.
I mean, especially when you've got anywhere from 7,000 to 9,000 applications coming in at the same time. We call it the avalanche season.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a little bit longer. I think no matter what we do, I think the biggest issue is addressing the concern that people appear to be working without a fingerprint clearance. And is there some way we can demonstrate that they have the clearance and that makes it okay?
So I like the idea of the spring semester, and if we think we actually could help those people who do get a hit, but it's one of those minor issues that could be cleared up quickly, and then we can get them going sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you got that, then at that point, you know, you're just, because you have a year to remediate your application. So if you were to send in your application for registration as an intern, you have a year from that date to give me your transcripts. So if you send it in, let's say at the beginning of this spring semester, which is what, February, January-ish, and, you know, we look at everything, we see that everything's good to go, then you're, even when you graduate, you're still waiting for your registration number, but you have your fingerprint clearance. So that takes care of the consumer protection piece. But technically, you're still having an individual without a registration working, and it is just taking care of the fingerprint piece and the consumer protection piece, you know, with the background check. Is that sufficient to satisfy the concerns that have been expressed? So that's, you know, I like the idea of getting it cleared up, because then you have till January the next year to get me your transcripts. You know, you graduate in May, we typically see those things in July. So by July, you could have your registration. So, I don't know, it's like, I'm trying to think about it, and then we have to look at Steve, and we're going to figure that out.
The idea, I mean, you could, no, actually, it's not too bad. It doesn't even, the system and nothing would really have to change. It would just be a matter of training interns, or not interns, but people in school still, that you can apply in a year earlier. So, I mean, and basically for us, it's really, well, I'm not the one really reviewing them, but the only concern I would have would be fingerprint. When we have the fingerprints in our system, somebody applies a year or even 2 years early, you could sit there and have that application out there. We don't want to maintain those fingerprints unless, I mean, it's seriously like they're going to get either a license or a certificate, because it's confidential information. So, I mean, that's one of the concerns. If for some reason after a year's time it might, it's not a big concern. It's one of the concerns I would have. But I mean, that for the process-wise, I mean, you could apply early. It would just sit there, and then we would wait for the transcripts to come in. I like the electronic transcript things too. I think that's a fantastic idea. So you really, I mean, if you didn't have the 90 days, I mean, you could easily, once you get that transcript, then they get their intern number. I don't know.
So that's actually part of my issue, is when I'm hearing the information, are we really thinking about, if we start the application process earlier, then we don't need the 90-day rules?
Well, honestly,
you
we
would
don't.
for a period of time.
Just
for
a period of time.
transcripts.
But it's, so we're dealing with an issue of, allowing them to count hours, and then also the submitting the complete application within 1 year. So it's two different issues. So, but at the same time, if we, let the registrants apply early, then really, then we can easily shorten the time, for them to, we can shorten the time for them to make up the deficiency. And then you don't need to drag it on for another, year to have that. We address the concern about, what are they, if they, just that, practicing without the license concerns. So I'm just trying to clear up, what's
I mean, because I think that the initial reaction to that was, you need to get rid of it, end of story. That was the preferred resolution.
Right.
So.
I have two questions.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I have two questions about logistically, if we were to do the fingerprints when they were still in school. Is number one, how would that work with, so let's say they submitted it in January going into their last semester, and we got the fingerprints. and let's just say that, you know how our system right now tracks, we get notified if there's a subsequent arrest. Would it do that for a person that's in our, it would? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the other question would be, so if they sent that in, would we just issue a letter saying, you know, how you have your fingerprint clearance with the board?
Well, yeah, I'm wondering if it's a letter or don't shoot me, Paula, I know she's watching.
I know.
You know, maybe there's some temporary,
I was thinking about
6-month temporary permit.
transition or provisional.
And you have 6 months to clear everything up with the board.
Upon graduation.
Upon graduation. So if we allow them to go early, we get the fingerprint clearance, you issue sort of a temporary permit that's only good for 6 months. And at the end of that period, then you would have to have a full registration. So then that sort of takes care of the consumer protection piece in terms of, yes, you have a fingerprint clearance, yes, you're blessed by the board. So if something were to happen in that time period, then we would have some jurisdiction. That's what I'm thinking. I'm kind of thinking, you know, similar to what BRN does with their temporary licenses, when they come walking through the walk, something like that. I mean,
just like the driver's license, you know,
Yeah.
you have a permit, you know.
Yeah,
a provisional permit.
So maybe it's just a permit.
It's just a permit for you to have permission to move on. And I'm actually thinking exactly the same thing. Because if you have kind of like a temporary, you know, time constraint permit, then it will allow them to practice. At the same time, they're under our jurisdiction.
Right.
And yet also, you know, put them, you know, a time limit for them to respond, you know, to submit all those information. And then they can count their hours.
Because we could get, I'm trying to think here. Yeah, I don't know, it's just you know, it's just kind of, I know Steve's like, huh, another pay?
No, I'm wondering what like the temporary and the whatever, just have them apply as early as they want, and then when they graduate, we get their, I mean, it might, who knows, it could be shorter than 90 days, it might be a week. If we get their transcripts right away, and we can give them the intern license.
I think it would be interesting to find out.
So,
from
I mean,
schools.
it's the schools that would be hindering. I mean, I'm just saying, if you just say, apply as early as possible, we get everything cleared, and the last thing that we need is just your transcripts to come in. I mean, I don't, without fooling around, getting messy with temporary and, yeah, I don't know. I
think we need to vet that out a little bit too with the staff and just.
Well, yeah, it is because that would then back to processing times. And
Yeah, the
stuff.
explosion you heard is staff.
I do. I wonder why, you know, there is a limit in the first place on when they have to apply, you know, just as you said, why not have it early as possible?
And to be honest with you, I don't think there's really in laws, it just says you must have, this is what you must have. We don't say anything about you cannot apply. You have the year time frame to complete yours. So I mean, those are the limits on it. A year to complete all deficiencies, and then there's really nothing to say when you apply. I mean, I can be in my second year of school probably and apply. I mean, but we cancel your application.
Thank you. So what I'm thinking of is that it sounds nice to start it in at the same time. It maybe make it easier when someone is applying for graduation to be able to finish that packet as well. But then we're also missing a portion of at least a semester or a year to a year and a half, depending upon the school. Some places have a 2-year placement for their practicum, you know, 1 year, one piece, because it's a 3-year program rather than a 2-year program. And then we're not protecting the public, which is the concern that these folks have had. So in my brain, what I'm thinking is that if it is required to start practicum, not that you can't be in practicum if something comes up, but until, excuse me, let me back that up. You have to apply for and submit the application short of the graduation transcripts at the beginning of practicum, regardless to where it is in your schooling system, because you will be notified anytime anything comes up. The same is also true because in the essence that even if I, as an intern and registered, if I have 2 or 3 employers, which I had to do back during the Great Recession, I had to have multiple DOJ checks at every location, regardless of the fact that I had been cleared and the board would know. So in my mind, it makes sense for it to be done at the beginning of practicum, not just at the end of the semester just before you graduate. Because then there is that period that could be as much as a semester to a year before that where someone's working, since the goal is the protection.
So get a fingerprint clearance from the board when you start your practicum.
Yes, yes. That it has to be done within the first, say, 45 days of starting the first practicum class. So it's at least halfway through the semester or most of the way through the first quarter of the practicum.
Wouldn't there still be an impact on board staff in terms of sending out letters that say?
Well, yeah, and the part of that, the submission of the fingerprints is pretty easy. It's what do we do with them? Because you have to have an application created in our database so that we can marry the two up.
Isn't the application process for the most of everything other than the transcripts is something that you put together that they can submit?
Right.
There would be no difference from what I remember when I applied between whether I did it after I graduated or if I did it before I graduated. Right. So since it's not hinged on anything other than the transcript in that respect, release it from that so that it can be done. You guys would then not have to necessarily have an avalanche either, because it would be spread out based on people's practicum, because there are so many more programs that are being mixed online and not, and so the programs are changing.
Yeah. I just had a suggestion handed to me. What if we required the schools to fingerprint before they went to practicum?
So that would come back to what Jenny, idea before, that because of the the complexity or the variety of the placement for the social work program, so when you start requiring, for one, you're stepping into, their, especially for the CSWE accredited places, you kind of like,
right.
There's that jurisdiction issue. Right. Who's telling who what to do?
Right.
And the second thing is, not necessarily, all the social work program, the placements, are mental health related.
Right.
So, so there's all these little things to tease out. Not that the idea is not good.
No, I think we've got some really good ideas to start with. Definitely we'll hear from Jeff, but I'm thinking that I think we have enough to start.
To think about.
And then to start to think about, go back with staff and kind of ponder those options.
Right.
And really tease them out to see what they look like.
Right.
In the interim, I certainly would like to get the input from schools.
Yes.
Regarding the transcripts and issuance. And I think that's kind of a key component. I think that if you were to say, no 90-day rule, but we could tell people, yeah, we can get you transcripts to the board within 2 weeks of graduation, then.
Normally, it's not the department to issue the transcript. It's the graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about the administrative part of the university,
right.
I don't think even our stakeholder and our professional association have a whole lot of influence. So that's the technicality part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like the idea that I think if the possibility of having a permit, or just within a length of time, that might be able to, to actually to clear out a lot of these jurisdiction issue, and also get rid of the 90-day rules and the counting hours and stuff like that, because they belong to us. They have a status. They have a role. So
we'll hear from Jeffrey, and then we'll kind of summarize what some of the options are that staff can take back and chew on. So.
Thank you very much. Jeffrey Liebert, AMFT California. I just want to first say thank you for designating time for this. I think there's clearly more discussion that needs to happen, and there's a potential for a really good solution here, so I appreciate that we will make time. Just a quick question. Based on other comments, I actually forgot that we did not have our fingerprints in a system when we're doing our practicum. And I'm wondering why people are not complaining about consumer protection there, but they are the 90 days. I'm wondering if you have feedback on that.
I have no idea.
Okay, fair enough. Not a problem.
I think it depends on the agency, isn't it? I know in my county, we fingerprint everybody.
Okay.
So, so I think it's not like a standard thing, in whatever setting, that the students are placed.
And that's totally fair. I guess for me, it seems like if you're going to complain that we're not consumer protection in the 90 days, why didn't we not do that this whole time with practicum, which has been happening for years?
And that's a school issue.
Right, right. And so I appreciate that. We will explore this further, and I think we can leave it at that. So thank you.
I had no idea, no vision that this would be resolved today.
No. But thank you. I appreciate it.
I wanted to throw it out there. Let's chew on it. Let's think about it. We'll go back and chat with staff. But yeah, we've got I think we're pretty clear.
Yeah, so we've got revisiting who does the fingerprinting and when applicants can put in submit their applications. The idea of a temporary or sort of a permit for a license. So we have a few ideas. And then the impacts of if the fingerprinting is done earlier and then there's some letting them get hours during that time, how do we let them know without confusing the issue and that sort of thing?
Exactly.
We have a few things. So.
And our staff isn't here, but I would imagine that they have a couple of additional suggestions too. But we'll look at them all and bring it back in September.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody who chimed in on that at this late hour. We appreciate it. We got one more agenda item, and I've been told that we should really get through this. I suggested tabling it, but we need to have a discussion about possible action regarding registrant employment by temporary staffing agencies. And this is an issue when we have who gets to be the supervisor, the designated supervisor, and where that agreement is between. So I think is that Christy going to lead that discussion?
That'll be me. So we've been aware that, and this is often with ASWs, that they're gaining hours of experience while employed by a temporary employment staffing agency. We're seeing it a lot with registrants placed at the Veterans Administration of the VA. And our current law does not explicitly address a temporary agency as an employer of registrants, and a lot of questions have come up with this arrangement because it throws a wrench into how the law is applied. And so I want to go through what kind of the problems are and discuss them a little bit. The first problem, and it's really cut and dry, is that temporary agencies have a tendency to employ registrants as an independent contractor under a 1099, which would result in the hours being denied. So that's sort of that happens under regular supervisors too. It's not unique to this setting, but that tends to be more of a common thing that we see. The next problem I'm going to talk about are a little bit bigger and have to do with how our law reads and who's the employer. So in LMFT and LPCC law, and if AB 93 were to pass, it would also implement these requirements in LCSW law. It requires registrants to perform services at the place where their employer regularly conducts business. So obviously, you're not going to go conducting business at a temp agency. The law goes on to specify that the services can be performed at other locations so long as the services are performed under the direction and control of the employer and supervisor and in compliance with the laws pertaining to supervision. So what that would mean in the case of a registrant employed by a temp agency, that the agency would be responsible for the direction and control of services provided by the registrant to ensure compliance with supervision laws. So in this kind of a situation, it would make a lot more sense to instead require the agency where the registrant has been placed to have that control and those responsibilities. The next problem with how the fit here with our law is the written agreement between the employer when there's and the supervisor when it's an outside supervisor. So you have a supervisor who's not employed by the registrant's employer. It's defined slightly differently between the professions, but that will be changing with AB 93. Right now, LCSW law, it defines it as a supervisor who is not employed by the supervisee's employer. LMFT and LPCC law, it defines it as a supervisor who serves as a volunteer in a non-private practice setting. And that would change to how it reads in LCSW law, which is a little bit more general, through AB 93. So I'm calling them outside supervisors, just to kind of use some shorthand. So the outside supervisor has to sign a written agreement with the employer to take supervisory responsibility for the registrant's services. Right now, LMFT and LPCC law go a little bit further and require the agreement to ensure the supervisor has access to client records, which is really important, and to prohibit the employer from interfering with the supervisor's legal and ethical obligations to ensure compliance with licensure requirements. So that really the purpose of this written agreement is to protect the supervisee and the clients of the supervisee. AB 93 would modify and standardize the written agreement across license types, and for all three, what it would do is require the supervisor to take supervisory responsibility. That's the outside supervisor. It would ensure access to client records and require the employer not to agree not to interfere with the supervisor providing clinical guidance to the supervisee. But this pending legislation does not address temp agency employers of registrants. So when you have a temp agency who places a registrant at an agency, the law does permit supervision by an outside supervisor if there's a written agreement, but in the case of a temp agency employer, the agreement would be between the temp agency and the outside supervisor, and it would really, again, make sense for it to be with where the registrant has been placed, with that employer, or with that agency where they've been placed. And then it gets kind of weird here. If a registrant is placed in an agency where the registrant supervisor is actually on staff at that agency, the written agreement would have to be between the supervisor who's on staff there and the temp agency. So it's a really weird, they're not really an outside supervisor, except that there's a temp agency involved that's not employing that supervisor. So that really makes no sense. It's because the way the law is written that the agreement has to be signed when the supervisors and registrant's employer are different. So, I feel like our first question is kind of, does it make sense to allow a temporary agency to employ registrants at all? And if so, if it is valid, because there was a reason for the VA to do this, they were hit really hard for backlogs, and it is one way to address those things for agencies. But if we believe that they should be allowed to employ registrants, there are some questions for consideration. And they would address those kind of strange things in the law that I just talked about. So, for example, should the law that allows registrants to perform services at other locations to exclude the temp agency and instead be between the agency where the registrant's been placed, which is the agency with responsibility for the clients, and the supervisor? So that's number one. Should the written agreement between the supervisor and employer specify that in the case of a temp agency employer that the agreement is instead between the agency where the registrant has been placed and the supervisor? And then should the law specify that a written agreement is not necessary if the supervisor is employed by the agency where the registrant has been placed by the temporary agency?
Yeah. So I guess the first question is, and do we want to allow temp agencies to continue with this? That's an odd setup. I don't know how the board feels about that or how the committee members feel about that. I mean, that's kind of the overarching question here, right? Is this a good setup? And if it is, then how do we remedy it to make sure we're protecting?
I'm wondering, so the temp agency really is like a referral services, like we talked about earlier, right? So, once they place that intern right there, it's temporary, and that the contract is between, the registrant and the agency themselves. They no longer, play any role. Mm-hmm. So, so it doesn't really make sense that, they should, the temp agency should even be considered in the licensing process. I mean, that's my understanding. So I wonder, apart from just making a referral for the place, for the possible employment opportunities, what other role that temp agency play?
Go ahead, Kim.
So what's happening is that the temp agency is the employer. They have the contract with the VA, and they place these registrants there, and the registrants gain their hours. They're actually working in a legal site, but when these folks, the registrants apply for licensure, they submit their hours. It is the temp agency that's certifying the hours and providing the W-2 in the form of a 1099. So that triggers us to say, well, this is a temp agency address. What business do you do? Oh, we're a staffing agency. So that's where, the verification of their employment is coming from the temporary agency. Because, technically, yeah, they're placing him. But the law says you can only earn it in this setting. And so when we ask for the letter of agreement, then you have the temporary agency representative, oh yeah, I'm going to sign that. But they don't review any files, they're not the supervisor, no, we just put them in a site where they're already going to have supervision. That's our problem. And those folks, they're not meeting the requirements under the law, and we find it more with ASWs than we do any other profession. Yes. And in fact, Spencer got involved in this. We had a woman, she's losing a significant amount of hours. I want to say almost all of them, because that's where she got them. She got them at the VA, but didn't get the written agreement and didn't get it correctly executed. And so the woman that's running this particular agency contacted me several times, and I've been doing this for millions of years, what's the issue, et cetera, et cetera. She got her attorney involved, and I'm not a lawyer, but I have a good one. So we crafted a letter, that basically in legalese said the very same thing I was, and that is you can't count those hours, it's not lawful.
Right.
So that's the problem. I mean, I personally don't have an issue with the temp agency finding the jobs. I have no issue with that. But they can't, the issue I have is that under the law, they can't assume the responsibility for anything that goes on there because they don't meet the site requirements within our law.
So they are actually a staffing agency instead of the temporary agency.
Yeah.
So so when they place, say like the VA, how long a length of time that the ASW worked there?
This particular one probably worked about 1.5 years.
So that's not temporary at all.
Everybody has a different opinion of temporary.
It's not temporary for a
Don't
year
we?
and a half. So that's why the definition is a little bit confusing for me.
They're just like the word big. It means different things to different people.
Right.
If you're short, everything's big. If you happen to be over 6'5", everything is not big. So, and there's everything in between. But so that's kind of the problem. I don't have an issue with the temporary or staffing agencies finding employment for them. I have no issue with that. I think they're doing a really great service. Mm-hmm. It's who's responsible.
So, are you done, Christine?
I'm done.
Okay, Benny?
I'm shocked.
Well, I just would want us to be thoughtful that we don't have unintended consequences in limiting the VA's access to service, because I know it's an underserved population already. And so I would like us to just be thoughtful to resolve the problem without having unintended consequences for some really needy populations.
So from the discussion then, it sounds like, at least on this end of the dais, that we're okay with temporary placement or service. And the services that place them, but we should perhaps revise the rules.
I think we need to make them clearer.
Okay.
Or at least we need to put some in place.
Okay, so let's go on that premise then.
Yeah.
So we're okay with the temp agencies. Mm-hmm. Are you okay with that, Christina?
Yeah, the temp agency who just make referral for possible employment opportunities. But what Kim was talking about is mostly about those non-temporary staffing agency that they are actually employed under them as an independent contractor.
Exactly.
And then they are placed at the VA, who is the really underserved population. Mm-hmm. So we kind of get stuck,
Well, and I'm putting them both in the same box, I guess. I think you're talking about referral, and then you're also talking about actually somebody who's an employee of the temp agency. Mm-hmm. So those are two different entities. So. Yeah.
Right.
And do we have the same issue with both of those?
Yeah, it's one and the same.
Okay.
It's one because what happens is, when they apply, we want either their W-2 that says they were an employee to earn their hours, or we need a letter that says they were a volunteer. And so, because these individuals don't necessarily discern between a W-2 and a 1099, they're just looking for that tax form. So they send in the 1099. Here it is, mm-hmm. and that's how we find out. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the issue applies to both. Does any potential remedy apply to both, or do you think we should separate them out and allow one and not the other? Because you're the one that brought up the concern, Christina, about. I'm trying to figure out.
What is your question again?
If you don't have an issue with the referral agencies working the same as the employment agencies.
I think the critical thing is, who pays the salary?
Yes.
So, it's not about the agency, I mean, it's not about whether it's a temp or a referral. If that particular employment, for that registrant, is paid through this whatever agency, that is not a mental health agency, that becomes problematic.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and that's why I'm trying to figure out whether it's a referral, because referral, they just make the referral and then the employment belongs to whatever, the social services or the mental health services. So, for that particular, the 1099, if they become independent contractor for the VA, for the school, for whatever, then that becomes problematic because, they are technically not mental health provider. And then, how you ensure, having the supervisor, all that thing that Christy talked about. So, yes, I have problem with that type of agency.
Okay. So, let's go with David, and then we'll come back.
Okay, thank you. So, Dave Clark, Couples Resource Collective. One of the things that comes to mind with this is that even though they are receiving a 1099, the VA is still paying that salary.
Right.
Ultimately, right?
Ultimately, yes.
So what I'm wondering is if there is a caveat or an exemption for the exempt settings, if somebody is placed under and receives a 1099 for providing services at an exempt setting, that they fall under the same category as a W-2, so that they are, and because they are actually being employed and providing the same exact service in that same exact way. So giving the exemption for those that are placed under a temp service under 1099, because not all places that are 1099 will give, or temporary services will give a 1099. Some of them will give a W-2. Right. So then you still run into the issue of, but they're employed by a temp agency, and then so you still run into issues no matter whether you have a W-2 or a 1099. So it makes sense to me that an exemption be given for those that are providing services at an exempt setting that receive a 1099. That might be your easiest way out of this without having to go through a lot of different things other than just adding that one little piece to the legislation between the W-2 and the volunteer.
So there is that theoretical, the principle-wise, tax-wise. I mean, Janley will explain this way easier about the whole purpose of 1099. So by nature, a 1099 is an independent contractor. Means that you can practice without supervision.
No, not how I'm meaning it.
But had the IRS,
right, the IRS will see you as an independent contractor. The IRS would see you as an independent contractor, not of, but you're paid through. Yes, you're a 1099 and you're a contractor through the temp agency. Yes, but are you a contractor in the same essence of where you're providing services? No, because the independent it's different. It's looked at differently because typically a 1099 for doing work on the inside like that is usually not what happens. I mean, I've worked for temp agencies before, and they usually give W-2s. It's strange to me to hear a temp agency give a 1099, right? Because that means they are subverting the labor law in my mind, right? So there's an issue with that. And so realistically, that person who's suffering this really has a labor law issue in my mind. And that may be their venue. But I think the thing that we can do, that I'd offer, is that it's changing that one bit of language, and that would help protect in case. The only problem with that is that the flip side is that could open up a big door to a bunch of people becoming 1099. So where do you go with this?
Yeah, and then I have to put on my investigative hat. Are you really doing that or not? I'm wondering if you're going to work for a temp agency like that, we just don't mandate that they provide a W-2 period. I don't know.
Or what if it's?
I thought the issue was who's doing the supervision and who's signing off on the hours.
That too.
I think that's almost.
So my thought of that in that same place of that is if you're working for the hours at an exempt setting, a W-2 is not required. Only a letter or the copy of the verification from the supervisor responsibility form.
With the hours.
Saying, right, everything being signed off. Right, exactly. Then you get rid of the need for a W-2, proof of W-2 from an exempt setting. Therefore, you get rid of the requirement for 1099.
So regardless of how you're employed, whether you're a contractor or an actual employee,
right,
then your only proof of hours earned are from the supervisor.
Right, as it is right now, whether I was working 1099 or any other location, my supervisor is the one that signs off on all of my documents.
It should be irrelevant to us, honestly.
Right.
I mean, what the relevancy is, how to prove how you've earned your hours.
Right, but if I'm at an exempt setting, and it doesn't matter if I have a W-2 or 1099 in the sense because I'm at an exempt setting already, since we've already had part of that discussion, right? So does it really matter in that respect if a person has it? I can understand in a private practice setting. That makes sense. But in the exempt setting, it doesn't necessarily make sense for a W-2, proof of W-2.
Yeah, and I think the other issue on top of that is also the quality of the supervision. That's the
other piece.
It's sort of the the idea that if you're just being placed somewhere, but then that agency that placed you is signing off on your hours. I mean, that's
the agency that placed you shouldn't be signing off on the hours.
Right.
It should be the clinical supervisor at the site that's signing off on those hours. They're the ones in control of the records, etc. So in my mind, that's the person who's responsible and should be signing off, and that's all that should really be necessary. In a private practice setting, because my understanding was that the 1099 was to ensure that people aren't out in the public realm being contracted, not doing contract work at an agency. That was my understanding of how this 1099 thing came into place to begin with. So that's what I was saying. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Jeffrey Liebert, MFT California. I just want to clarify something that I heard him say, that you could be at one of these temporary agencies and they may give you a 1099 and they may give you a W-2. So it sounds like the temp agencies that give you a 1099 get pinged by you guys as a concern, but the same agency who would just give you a W-2 instead doesn't get pinged.
It could be both a W-2 because you have your supervision documents, and so you're filling out where you got your supervision, and if we look at and if we need to verify some hours, we'll look at that tax document and we'll look at the address and whether it be a 1099 or a W-2. So I apologize for it's late, but it's the address. And
Perfect.
If I see 123 Main Street, but I'm at the Coachella correctional facility, I'm like, this doesn't match up. What's going on?
Thank you.
Then we ask for further clarification.
Thank you.
So it seems to me, I mean, it's not a simple remedy, but I do think that you brought up the recommendation that perhaps we make sure that the supervision is being done on site by the responsible party is the supervisor at the site. So you just don't allow what you're saying. You don't allow that situation. You just prohibit that.
I'm not sure what.
You have it in here. Right?
Your recommendation?
Should the written agreement be in the case of a temp, the agreement shall be instead between the agency where the registrant has been placed and the supervisor. So
yeah, it's kind of tweaking the law to reflect that it needs to be the agreement needs to be with the agency that's responsible for the clients.
Right. To me, that seems to be a bit of an easy fix for that.
Yeah,
concerning the quality of the service delivery.
Yeah, so exactly. I think the 1099 issue, I can see it. It's somewhat of an education issue. We could maybe do more in education. But what if there's a temp agency that only issues 1099s, and they're the ones that service the VA? I don't know. That kind of.
I don't know. I understand why that's our concern. Honestly, the tax documents. Right. I don't understand why it's a bother to us whether they're an employee or a contract employee.
Because you're a registrant, you can't independently practice. The law says you can earn your hours as a volunteer or an employee. Those are the only two ways you can get your supervised hours.
Then why are we even taking anything with a 1099?
Well, we're not right now.
Okay.
So would it be helpful, since the law is confusing about how to handle this situation, is one thought I had is just to draft a regulation section that describes if you're employed through a third-party temp agency, here's exactly what we expect, A, B, C, D.
I think that helps.
And then we can draft that and then go through the bullet points and then see if we want to change anything or add anything. But I think that would be, if you're employed through a third-party temp agency, you need to make sure you're doing X, Y, Z, and then we have that to point to in the law for people, and we can put it on the website. that this regulation section describes what you need to do if you're in that situation.
Right. So does that include people that are getting a 1099?
No, just people that are working for a temp agency.
But see,
but if they're working for a temp agency and getting a 1099, then I'm with Jeffrey in that if they're doing the same thing and it's just a paperwork issue of what.
They're a de facto employee, regardless of whether they're getting, it's a 1099 or W-2, it's de facto, they're employees. So the, letter of the law says they are not according, or they cannot be that because they're called that under IRS code. But, I mean, if you were to take that to court, sorry, I think it's a de facto employment. I don't understand.
So I think the registrants, need to be very aware of, the law, because the law is not broken. The law's been played, you kind of like tweaked by the employers or the temp agencies. So, and the registrants has the responsibility to understand law and ethics and how those actually affect, their clinical hours. So I don't see the law's broken. I think, it's really about buyer aware. If somebody not being educated or not knowing enough that independent contractor really cannot count the hours, we can't tweak the law for them. So I think, just that education piece is important, and then all the other, it only makes sense if you take the temp agency outside and then be able to count it. So, yeah.
So I guess my question goes back to the impact.
Right.
And if I guess what you're saying is right now anybody getting a 1099 is not counting hours.
Right, whether they're in a temp agency
So
or anywhere else.
whether they're working for the VA or they're not working for the VA, they're not able to count those hours. So by saying, by not changing that law, we're not impacting the service to the VA.
No.
Am I understanding?
I don't believe so. I mean, it's only a handful. I probably see 3 to maybe, I don't know. Let's just say less than 10 cases a year where that impacts. And the range of the hours can be just a few hundred to a few thousand. So the consequence, I mean, the VA is still getting the service. The consequence is that individual cannot count those hours.
So that's an educational issue for the
Exactly.
individual. I just strongly don't want to impact.
No, I don't either.
I also don't want to, I think it's almost a barrier to our, registrant, or people who are applicants, I guess, I don't know what you want to call it, but the folks that are earning their hours, if they can't do things under a 1099, because a lot of places use them, so.
They can, if they have their license, but they just cannot do it as a registrant.
I know, I'm just
wondering. And the kicker is on that, sometimes the entities, whether it be the VA or other entities, because there's no other way to award the stipend, the small amount of money that is given to these people, that's the only mechanism that they have to track for their bookkeeping purposes. Mm-hmm. But that's easily detected because those aren't really large amounts, as opposed to I've worked a whole year at the VA and I've got a tax document that says I yanked in about $45,000, $50,000 a year. And to me that says, ooh, you were employed there. You went there 4 or 5 days a week and provided services for almost 52 weeks a year, except you're not a federal government employee, so they're not paying the employee taxes, they're not paying any Social Security, they're not paying any health benefits. I mean, so they're avoiding all that other stuff. So, I don't know. It's a problem, and I think education is one piece. But I also like Roseanne's suggestion of having something very clear so that we could say, here it is, and if the temp agencies want to do something with that, then they have to follow A, B, and C.
Jeffrey?
Thank you very much. Jeffrey Lieberday, MIFT, California. I just want to reiterate exactly what you just ended on, Kim, that I appreciate your suggestion, Roseanne, to start drafting some of this language. If anything, it allows us to revisit this and kind of flush it out and hash it out a little bit more later. So I appreciate that. And I think in the meantime, we've all said it, but if we can really push the education on this to let interns and registrants, associates to know it's their responsibility, one, to ask, but it's also our responsibility maybe to tell the employers and our the people that were maybe sending the survey out, hey, make sure that these employers know they need a W-2.
Yeah.
We can kind of hit it from both sides,
Or letter
maybe.
of agreement. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Don't send me the 1099. Just send me the letter of agreement.
Right.
La, la, la.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, do you have enough to go on? Christy and Roseanne, did you hear enough discussion today?
Yeah.
And you will bring it back to us in September?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. All right, thanks, everybody. Let's see. So our last item, I think, is just public comment, right? So we've got public comment. Anybody have any public comment on items not on the agenda? You're like, yeah, get us out of here. Okay, any suggestions for future agenda items? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. For those of you that stayed all day, thank you.